And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and it's been about a week since we've made content, and since I've done a live show. Maybe it's even been a little bit more than a week. And the reasoning behind that was A, I wasn't feeling good, but B, I had to help my family move. Spent basically the equivalent of a full week's worth of work in terms of hours, helping them move. We have a lake house up north in Michigan that we had to empty out in approximately a 3-day span. We did it. We had to load up a few trailers to bring things home. The brake lines, as I posted on my Twitter, just absolutely got destroyed on the way back. So the return trip was delayed by 4 or 5 hours, and that delayed things. That's part of the reason why this show didn't happen earlier today or even last night, is I couldn't do much on the road without much data. And also, I had some new employees join College Football with Sam. So we have new members of our team. They're working their way in things, and I'm trying to help them. So just that plus the moving plus not feeling good meant that doing a whole week's worth of content was going to be overwhelming and probably push some important things off. But we're back now. As you can probably tell by some of the new graphics, we've already implemented some things, and I'm very happy with where this channel has gone, where it's going. I think that the rest of this year is going to be even better than it's already been. And this past week was a very chaotic week in college football. I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow because I want to get into Penn State, UCLA, Texas, Florida, just really more so look at those two teams, the Nittany Lions and the Longhorns, because I had those as my preseason top two teams, and they don't even look anything like the preseason top two. Ohio State, Oregon, and you can argue Miami, maybe Indiana, maybe Alabama are kind of in that top tier. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. I don't exactly know what's gone wrong with those two. Sort of similar to Clemson, if I'm being honest. Don't exactly know what's happened, but I'm going to try to get more into that tomorrow. A fun statistic for each of those teams before we get started here, and make sure to subscribe to the show, like it, and be active in the chat if you aren't already. A fun piece of data for the Longhorns and the Nittany Lions are that the Longhorns are 106th in success rate when it comes to throwing the football. So that means there are 105 teams who on an average basis have a higher percentage of their pass attempts as successful than the Longhorns. And a successful play is on first down, you gain 60% of your yardage. Or 50%, I believe. I think on second down it's 60%, and third and fourth down you gain all the necessary yards to convert. That is pretty terrible given the talent they have as a team overall, on the offensive side of the ball with Arch Manning and Ryan Wingo and Jack Endries and Parker Livingston and DJ Campbell, Brandon Baker, some of the other players they have on offense. For Penn State, they are outside the top 50 in yards per dropback. I think they're outside the top 50 in expected points added per dropback. They're a pretty bad throwing team. And they've also regressed from last year in regards to running the football too. They've regressed on the defensive side of the ball. It is not a pretty picture for the Nittany Lions or for the Longhorns. It's not. It's really bad. It's really ugly. I watched bits and pieces of those games. Again, I was moving, so I sadly missed part of Saturday. But from what I could gather, what I could watch, Texas just got destroyed on the lines of scrimmage. Penn State was just a bit slow both offensively and defensively, and UCLA played motivated. Penn State looked like they didn't want to be there. I question whether or not those players at this point believe in James Franklin. I really do question that, but I'm not in that locker room, so I can't exactly tell you what they're thinking over there in Happy Valley. But not fun times whatsoever. It's pretty miserable times if you are a Nittany Lion or a Longhorn, because the odds of those teams winning out, the odds of them winning out with how they've played so far are slim to none. I mean, if you're Penn State, you got to beat Iowa on the road, Ohio State on the road, Indiana at home, Michigan State on the road. You're not winning all four of those. You're probably not even winning three of them at this point. You look at Texas. You got to beat Oklahoma this weekend, neutral field. Got to go on the road to play Georgia, beat them. You got to beat Texas A&M at home. Vanderbilt isn't going to be a picnic. I mean, you're not winning all four of those games. Heck, there's a chance you don't even win three of those, if you get the point. So, yeah. I just remembered that I forgot my charger. I think that's the only error so far that I've made, and probably the only error that I will make. So I have to get that to make sure that I stay on time here. But I'll be right back with the charger. Okay, now I'm not going to veer too much off course. That's something I like to do on these live shows, is sometimes go on tangents or make the segments longer than they should be. But now that I have my trusty old timer with me, I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. But let's get started. Again, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We're only going live on a Tuesday because I wanted to get these segments out as soon as possible. This was as soon as possible that I could get them out, for a variety of reasons that I discussed at the beginning of the show. Tomorrow we will be live at 6 p.m. or maybe earlier, depending on my schedule. Someone wants to collaborate with me, I really want to collaborate with them. I might move my live show around depending on that. At 8 p.m., though, for sure, that's set in stone. We're going to have the Creator Roundtable, trying to get a few yeses or nos answered back on that, but we'll have anywhere from 3 to 5 people, including myself, on that roundtable for, again, about an hour, just looking at all the games for the week. All right. Speaking of the games of the week, let's talk about Ohio State and Illinois. Talk about a rivalry that I don't think a lot of people know about, that a lot of people easily forget. I don't even know if these schools consider themselves rivals, but the Eli Buck Trophy is an actual trophy. You can look it up. It's a turtle, I think a wooden turtle. Maybe it's a bronze turtle. I don't know exactly. But, yeah, it is a rivalry trophy. So the Eli Buck Trophy game, it's between two ranked Big Ten teams. What I'm excited to see personally out of this game is that Ohio State's defense is ridiculously good. But we've seen now, whether it's Washington traveling to Maryland and not looking good whatsoever, or Texas getting owned on the line of scrimmage by Florida in the swamp and not looking good offensively. This is probably outside of maybe DeMond Williams, the best quarterback that Ohio State's played. And I think there are some differences between Altmaier and Williams, and that Williams is much more talented and pretty close to Kyler Murray. But Altmaier's just been ridiculously efficient and has looked not like a pro, not like an NFL quarterback, but he's certainly a gamer in college. I wonder if Ohio State's once again going to hold this team to single digits, if they'll allow a double-digit score. I'm also curious to see how their offense looks because, in theory, Ohio State should score 60 or 70 here if they wanted to. And if they simply tone down their drives and go low tempo as they have been, they should score on all of their drives. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Again, that is just in theory. It's not like Illinois' defense has played fantastic or whatever, but they actually did, I think, a pretty good job against USC, given how efficient USC's offense has been. I think no matter what here, Ohio State does score in the 30s. It's just a question of whether or not Illinois can score in the 30s. And the likelihood of that, probably pretty low. Just putting it there not too kindly. Number 1, undefeated Ohio State travels to Champaign, Illinois to take on the 17th ranked Illinois Fighting Illini, who, if not for a loss to Indiana, would also be undefeated. They have 5 wins, their sole loss again coming to the Hoosiers 63-10. They have beaten USC. They're coming off of a double-digit road win against rival Purdue. Ohio State, their best win, I would argue, is still over Texas in week 1, 14-7. May not have been their most impressive performance, but it was the best opponent they beat, and they are undefeated. They're number 1 in the power ratings. They're number 1 in the polls. I think they're among the best teams in America, along with just a select few others. They're favored by 14.5 points on the road, so I think that reflects where Ohio State is at in regards to their program, but also the team that they are fielding in 2025. A fun fact, there's actually a rivalry trophy between these two teams, the Alibuck Trophy. It's a tortoise, a turtle, and I think that it is either wood or bronze. Don't exactly know, but that's not the reason we're talking about this game as much as I think the trophy's kind of cool. It kicks off, this game does, at noon Eastern time on Big Noon Kickoff, aired on Fox. And what I think is most fascinating about this matchup is that both of these teams are top 20 in the Big Ten, but Ohio State is viewed as this elite team, as potentially the favorite to win the national championship, depending on who you ask. If you look at the odds, they are almost the unanimous favorite to win it all. Not by this wide margin, but they're slotted at number 1 almost no matter what book you look at. And Illinois is this team that's fighting to just be in the CFP conversation. And I think that they need a win. I think they need a win to be in that college football playoff conversation. I want to really focus on Ohio State here. That's where I want to begin this, talking about the road team first, and that will be a recurring theme in my preview and prediction videos. So the Buckeyes are first in FPI, also second in S&P Plus, and you look at the dominance metrics, the points per play margin, the expected points added margin that they have, their wins, they don't have any losses, the fact that every week it feels like the offense is settling into its identity. Still don't quite have a concrete answer as to what their identity is, but I feel like it's coming into being. And that is, we are going to pick you apart in the passing game. We are going to move Jeremiah Smith around like a chess piece so that your defense will focus on him, and so that our other wide receivers, mostly Carnell Tate, but also, the receiving tight ends, Max Clare or Will Kazmarek, a little bit of Brandon Inniss or Mylan Graham, things can open up for them. And even if you're trying to cover Smith, well, it's not going to work because he's just that good. I feel like that's their identity. And then they use the ground game to try and control the clock and simply keep opponents honest, but that's not where their identity or strength is. That's in the quarterback, the tackles and offensive line and pass protection. It's in their tight ends, not just as blockers, but also as receivers. They're good there too. And their wide receivers as well, who are phenomenal in all aspects of the game. Ohio State is number one in the polls. I actually think as of right now, they have the strongest argument to be number one just because of how clean and crisp they look. The way they beat Minnesota was very impressive. Now, I don't think Minnesota is a good football team. I never really thought they were a good football team after the first 3 weeks of the season. That loss to California was pretty ugly, and the fact that Rutgers doesn't have a defense and Rutgers nearly held them to under 30 points is not particularly awe-inspiring. But they carved Minnesota apart in just about every way possible. And the cuts that they produced were so clean, they could just, seamlessly, calmly take muscle off the bone. That's what Ohio State is. They're very surgical. They're well coached. They don't beat themselves. And they are a confident team with just enough humility to not really overlook anyone, to take everyone seriously. They're intelligent. They're freakishly athletic, littered with NFL players. There is so much to love about Ohio State. And I think that this team has a really good chance of not just repeating as national champions, but winning the Big Ten. And with how their schedule lines up and with who they are as a team, there's a chance that they could go 16-0. There's a realistic chance of that. I mean, Texas, per the power ratings, and this was the case in the preseason, but it still is the case here, is their best opponent in the regular season. It's Texas. Penn State has fallen off of a cliff. Illinois is better than they were last year, but not a top 10 or even top 15 quality team. They're probably not even a top 20 quality team when you look at the advanced metrics and the power ratings. They don't play Indiana. They don't play Oregon. And Michigan, it's a road game that might at the end of the year even be a tougher challenge than the Texas game. In the advanced analytics, Michigan's actually trending to possibly be a better team than Texas this year, especially if you remove the priors. If you remove the priors, they're already viewed as a better team in the advanced metrics. They're still not solidly top 10, while Ohio State is solidly top 2, if not solidly number 1. They will be favored in all of their remaining regular season games. Now, if they get to Indy, or if they reach the playoff and get outside the first round or two, it's a different discussion at that point, no matter whether you're favored or not. Your goal is just to win. Your goal, especially since you won it last year, is just to compete, and Ohio State will compete. In this game, what I look for is making sure that Ohio State can have the same level of efficiency that they've had against inferior competition. So how you carved up Minnesota, how you carved up Grambling, how to a certain degree, but in a very clunky way, you carved up Ohio. Didn't carve up Texas, but you beat them, and Texas athletically and from a roster standpoint is better than Illinois. If you are a team that is just as good as you are last year, if you want to have the hope of being that type of team that Ohio State was last year, you will go into Champaign and you will beat them by 4 touchdowns. You will cover the spread. You will dominate. From the end of the first quarter at minimum, you will look like the clearly superior team. Every position for Ohio State is at minimum strong when you look at the national average college football team. Now, they do have some weak links, as every team does. This isn't 2001 Miami, and even they probably had some weak links, especially from an NFL draft or NFL talent standpoint. Their quarterback, Ken Dorsey, wasn't as talented as Andre Johnson or Clinton Portis or Jeremy, I think, Shockey or maybe Shocker at tight end, or many of the other first-round picks, Vince Wilfork, that they produced. This team is its strongest offensively at, I would say, quarterback, wide receiver. I love the offensive tackles they have. Offensive line in general, I think, is stronger than the national college football average, especially in pass protection. I would like to see it do better in the ground game, especially since they mostly face light boxes, because if you don't play a light box defense against Ohio State, you're an idiot, because they'll just beat you over the top. So any defense worth a lick is going to play you with a light box. And you always want to run in a light box, especially if you have the talent and reputation that Ohio State does. So I'd like to see more there, but that's mostly nitpicking. I mean, they had that same issue last year and won it all. Michigan the year before did not have NFL receivers. They won it all. Georgia the year prior did not have anywhere close to a first-round NFL quarterback, and it's not like they were insanely deep at wide receiver either, although A.D. Mitchell and Ladd McConkey were really good. Still not even close to who Ohio State had. They won it all. They also had a defense that took a step back from their 2021 selves that also had the same quarterback. You get the point. Unless you are a 1995 Nebraska, 2001 Miami, no one's perfect. And Ohio State's favored here by 14.5 points for a reason. The defense, you got, Caden Curry, Caden McDonald. You have Edric Houston, Tywone Malone, Will Smith. You have other defensive end, Kenyatta Jackson, Bo Atkinson, Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Peyton Pierce. At safety, Caleb Downs, obviously. And then you have Jalen McClain, Malik Hartford, Lorenzo Styles, Jermaine Matthews, Davison Igbinosun. There's no real weakness on defense. There might be players that aren't as good as other players in terms of starting lineup, but there are no real weaknesses defensively. I mean, they are so good at playing defense, at making sure that you don't get either the big play, or if you do, that you don't get the big play inside the 20s. They are really good at making sure that you don't get a touchdown. They're the only team that hasn't allowed a rushing touchdown, which is pretty incredible. And then offensively, this team obviously does a really good job at attacking you over the top. And then especially with Bo Jackson, when he's in there at running back, they do a good job of keeping you honest in the ground game. So I'm impressed with this Buckeye team and what they have shown me so far. I think that their strongest area in this matchup is going to be, quite honestly, it's going to be either that passing defense with some of the players they have that could pass rush, Arvell Reese spying Luke Altmaier or coming in pass rush situations when appropriate. I mean, he's a future first-rounder at linebacker. It's either that or it's Ohio State's passing offense against an Illinois secondary that, because of the absence of Xavier Scott, I believe, they're not totally healthy. And they've also had some injuries here and there. And look, the defense for Illinois is very inconsistent. Illinois is an inconsistent team outside of really their passing offense. And even there, they allow plenty of sacks. Their offensive line is not up to standard. It just isn't. The weakest part for Ohio State here will probably be, depending on which Illinois offensive line shows up, it will probably be Illinois' rushing attack and them stubbornly running the ball, and Ohio State and Patricia being willing to give up some yards in between the 20s. Now, it's worked for Ohio State so far, but sometimes when you give up yards in between the 20s, you can't always count on bowing up inside the red zone. I mean, Ohio State mostly could last year, but there were games where they just didn't, because no one's perfect. No unit is perfect. So if there is any weak spot or weakness at all, it would be that, I think. For Illinois is a above average, maybe good Power 4 team. That's what Illinois is. I am rooting for them, not like in this game, but rooting for them to be successful, because I like the idea of these smaller programs who are punching above their weight class, and Illinois is very much doing that. That's why they beat USC. I mean, USC, when you look at the dominance metrics, is a top 10, possibly top 5 team, certainly top 15 team. Illinois is not that. And Illinois beat them and could have dominated that game had a controversial fumble call not went against them and had their other running back, Khalil Valentine, held onto the football. We all make mistakes. I'm not chastising individual players. I'm just saying they're an admirable team, a good operation. I mean, I was correct in picking that Indiana would blow them out because I think Indiana's in a totally different stratosphere than Illinois is. Indiana is so much closer to Ohio State than Illinois is, for example. However, I think I might be wrong in the overall picture of Illinois this year, where I thought record-wise it was a guarantee they would regress. They've beaten Duke. They have beaten USC. They are 1-0 in one-score games, and they're not really playing in one-score games. And when they're not playing in one-score games, outside of when they played Indiana, they're winning said games. They could very easily go 9-3, 10-2. If they win this game, 11-1 is not out of the picture. Even though power ratings-wise, 11-1, according to the computers, is probably impossible. But this is a good team where they don't just have Luke Altmaier on offense, although he's a really good player, but Khalil Valentine and Caden Fagan, I think, is a respectable running back duo. You got Hank Beatty, Justin Bowick, and some other players at wide receiver. Bowick is my favorite of all of their wide receivers. I really am a huge fan of Justin Bowick. I think that he has this knack of getting open and making key plays when Illinois needs a key play, and him and Altmaier have a special connection there. You got the tight end Tanner Arkin. Defensively, I think that Illinois does have some issues for sure, but I've been impressed with their defensive front. A huge part of the reason why they were able to beat USC is that like Kurt Neal, James Thompson, Gabiakis, those defensive linemen or outside linebackers who could functionally play as defensive ends really ate up USC's, albeit injured, but still a USC offensive line and running back group that were averaging 7 yards per carry and probably still are even after that game. It's a very impressive effort that I saw in that matchup by an Illinois defensive front that has Dylan Rosiek, Gabiakis, Kurt Neal, James Thompson. I love what they have on the defensive line. And you also got to remember and pay attention to a Gentle Hunt, Tamiwa Durogiae, hopefully that's how you say his name, Alec Bryant, Malachi Hood. They have a really good defensive front, and I thought the secondary was going to be their strength entering this year. I think there's a chance that it could be that Illinois defensive front that is indeed a strength for them. Luke Altmaier and his receivers are the strength of the offense. I like to look at how their top 20 in yards per dropback, averaging about 8.8 yards per dropback, and that factors in Altmaier getting sacked 19 times, despite a lack of pass protection, a critical lack of pass protection. Their passing offense is still among one of the nation's better passing offenses. They have good receivers, good tight end, and I would say a great college quarterback. Luke Altmaier right now, I think, is sixth in QBR. He has yet to throw an interception. And, I mean, he is throwing lasers. He's making the right reads. He's rarely throwing the ball, if ever, in harm's way. And that's without a perfect supporting cast. So, for example, he does not have Julian Sayin supporting cast. Julian Sayin might have the best supporting cast in all of college football. Doesn't take any credit away from him, but when you have Jeremiah Smith and you have Carnell Tate and no other wide receiver is close to even Tate, let alone Smith, there's no arguing that Julian Sayin's job is made much easier than, say, Luke Altmaier's, and I don't think anyone would debate against that. I mean, Altmaier does not have the pass protection. He does not have the receivers, the tight ends. I don't know if anyone in that Illinois running back room is even as talented as Bo Jackson is, for example. These teams are just operating on entirely different levels. Illinois, for example, they average negative 0.07 expected points added per rush attempt. That's outside the top 100. It is a rushing offense that really only looked effective against USC's defensive front. Well, USC is the size that Ohio State has on the defensive front, and I think Eric Gentry is a future NFL linebacker, much like Arvell Reese. They do not have the depth, and they do not have the DBs that can, tackle with perfect efficiency and take elite angles. They don't have that. So I have a hard time seeing Illinois have a lot of success on the ground. I think their path to victory here is they win the turnover battle. They're plus 1.2 in terms of turnover margin per game. They average plus 1.2 in turnover margin per game. A lot of that has to do with Altmaier not turning it over, and Caleb Patterson leads the team with 2 fumbles recovered this college football season so far, and I imagine that he will probably have many more fumble recoveries coming his way because Illinois is just, they're that good. They've copied Iowa, Brett Bielema's alma mater, in that way of successfully and sustainably replicating turnovers. They have done that, and that's pretty incredible if you ask me. One more thing I want to touch on before we get to my prediction here. There's one more thing I want to touch on. I do think that Ohio State is the better team here, and I think they have a lot of advantages. They hold a lot more valuable cards in their hand than Illinois does. But I think what Illinois can do is, if you really trust your DBs, or you really trust your defensive front enough to maybe lightly stack the box and trust the seniority of your linebackers to know when Sayan's pulling the football and not handing it off, to not get bit by play action. Ohio State plays off of motion, moving around Jeremiah Smith, and off of the potential burst of their running back room and the downfield blocking of their tight ends and their offensive line. They play off of that very well with play action. If you can be disciplined and slow down that rushing attack, which is kind of middle of the road when you look at expected points added and only above average in yards per carry, if you can stop Ohio State's rushing attack with a light box and force Julian Sayin to beat you, which he has with every other team, maybe, just maybe, with it being a road game and you probably having the best defense that Ohio State has played in terms of what a Big Ten defense is since Texas, maybe you can force a turnover here or a turnover there. And offensively, you pair that with a quarterback who has shown enough moxie and enough poise and strength and talent to maybe he can fit it into tight windows all day. That is your path to pulling off the upset, because Ohio State is just the better overall team. They have the better overall staff. I don't think they're overlooking Illinois. They're better defensively everywhere. I would argue even they're better offensively everywhere than Illinois is. And for that very reason, I am picking Ohio State to win, and not just win, but I also think they'll cover that 14.5 line there. It is a noon game. The environment will probably still be as ruckus as it could possibly be, given the, stadium restrictions. Maybe there will be a lot of Ohio State fans there. I mean, I don't know, but regardless of that, I don't think that Ohio State's going to be fazed by this team or this environment. I think they're going to win. I think they're one of the best teams in football. Illinois is simply an above-average good team, and it's not like they have any matchup edge to exploit here. For example, if Illinois was Iowa, for example, I think Iowa would match up much better with Ohio State than Illinois does, because they're stronger in the trenches, their defense is overall better, and it's easier to run the ball on Ohio State than pass the ball on them. You'd rather be a team that struggles to pass but is really good at running the ball and play Ohio State that way than be a more balanced offense but your strength leans passing. Ohio State's ability to QB spy, their ability to cover, to mix up coverages, their ability to even get to the quarterback is much stronger because they're the best in that category, I believe. It is stronger than their ability to just straight up line up against you if you have a good O-line and push you over and get infinite TFLs. They're good in that area too, just not as good as they are at stopping the pass and playing lockdown defense in the air attack. Illinois is not built that way. So, yeah, it's a bad matchup. It's a matchup that favors Ohio State. That's why I'm picking them to win and cover. Looking at the Big Ten standings here, Illinois does have a chance to really cement themselves as being a team that could maybe flirt with Indy or definitely reach the playoffs if they win. For Ohio State here, you're sitting at the top of the conference with Oregon, Indiana. Michigan's not undefeated, but they are in conference play. So those are the teams right now that are tied for first in Big Ten standings. Depending on how Indiana, Oregon does, and Michigan, USC, you have a chance to really pull away, start pulling away from the rest of the pack. And this might be their toughest game. I think Penn State will be a tougher test than Illinois, but maybe not. Penn State's played rather poorly. This will probably be their toughest test right up until that Michigan game if Penn State continues to play the way that they have been playing. I think Ohio State certainly scores in the 30s, if not 40s. Maybe they want to send a message and they score in the 50s. I don't think Illinois will be held to single digits, but I don't think they're going to score more than 20 here. We'll see ultimately what happens. That's why we play the games. That's why God has given us the opportunity to watch these games and for the players to play them. But I think Ohio State wins this game comfortably. That was probably too long of a segment, but whatever. It is what it is. Maybe that can be my longer segment of the day, and everything from here on out can be a little bit shorter. A lot of information to unpack in these new segments and new graphics, which aren't made by me. They are made by my team members. So make sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and be active in the live chat. That's the best way to support me and my team. And yes, I say team. I think I have like 5 members, including myself, of the College Football with Sam team now. And it's an honor to serve alongside it's an honor to serve alongside my team members here in producing what I think can be and is the best college football content on YouTube, and our goal is to reach 100,000 subscribers soon. But let's move on to Indiana and Oregon. I think this is the game of the week, and this might be another longer segment, especially since these are 2 top 10 teams, and it's one of the only other games we're covering that's a ranked-on-ranked matchup. So some team is going to lose and fall, perhaps precipitously, in the polls, depending on what happens here. Same thing with that Ohio State and Illinois game. But let's get right to it. Undefeated Illinois, or not undefeated Illinois, my apologies. We have an undefeated Big Ten conference game between 2 top 10 Titans. And yes, I say Titans, because Oregon, per the efficiency and dominance metrics, is number 1 or number 2. Ohio State's the only team in that conversation, again, per the advanced metrics. Indiana, if you take out season priors, per FEI, Brian Fremeau's FEI, which is a combination of S&P Plus and I think his F Plus rankings. Or maybe that's what I think F Plus is the combo between FEI and S&P Plus ratings. Anyway, we have undefeated number 7 Indiana traveling to also undefeated number 3 Oregon. This is going to be the game of the week. Could be the game of the year. Oregon and Penn State gave us what could be the game of the year a few weeks ago in Happy Valley in that double overtime thriller. And when you look at the efficiency and dominance metrics here, Oregon is a top 2 team. Number 1 at best, number 2 at worst. When you look at Indiana, if you take out season priors, this is a top 4 team, could even be number 1. According to FEI, by wonderful college football analyst and expert Brian Fremeau, his rankings, which essentially measure how much a college football team deviates from the average. So instead of measuring by how many points Team A is better than the average college football team in a neutral field, as S&P Plus and FPI try to do, FEI measures in terms of how far above or below is your team using standard deviations. And if you take out priors, so priors are prior season success, usually recruiting values are implemented there, Indiana would be number 1 in that metric and probably a lot of metrics here. Oregon is a 7.5 point favorite. College game day is going to be in attendance. Autzen is loud. Indiana's played in loud environments. Ohio Stadium, Notre Dame Stadium, they were dominated there. They failed, but I would assume that they've learned some lessons from those experiences as Cignetti and his staff, same with Dan Lanning and his staff, run an elite, wonderful operation. Some of the best staffs in America are going to be there, and they're going to be on the sidelines coaching against each other. And you're going to see a lot of NFL scouts there, or maybe you won't see them, but they're going to be there. Believe me. If anyone has an opportunity to attend this game, they should. I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup between 2 titans of the 2025 season. Indiana is a mean, gritty, physical blue-collar team. And while Oregon may not have the blue-collar reputation because everyone talks about how they have unlimited NIL money, they work hard. And they have arrived at where they're at because of their dedication to the game, because they are disciplined, because they know what wins games, talent in the trenches, along with having enough athletes on the outside, offensively and defensively, to make amazing plays. Like Brycen Moore making those big plays, for example, on that 4th and 1 or 4th and short around the 50 for Oregon against Penn State, or Dylan Thieneman in that same game making that awesome leap up in the air and intercepting Drew Aller on the first Penn State play, offensive play, in double overtime. So I'm excited for this game. It's 3:30, going to be on CBS. My eyes will be glued to the screen for the entire duration of this game. I am a known Michigan fan, Michigan student, who also has a lot of admiration for Ohio State because of the operation they run. I view the game as sacred. I think because of how good these teams are, and because Indiana's a rising power, and Oregon doesn't quite have the respect of an Ohio State, Georgia, or Alabama, not even probably of Texas, so you could still consider them a rising power, although I think they've already proven themselves and arrived there. I'm going to be highly invested in this game, in these two teams. So let's start off talking about Indiana, because Indiana's the road team. They're the underdog. They're playing visitor here. And what fascinates me about Indiana is that they seemingly, as of right now, are defying talent limitations. They are looking at Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio, and they read it. It's like this. You know, they're reading it. Interesting. So, wait, you're telling me just based on, all of this history here, that our team can't do anything in terms of playoff wins or national title wins because we don't have 4 stars and 5 stars. And based on what the current metrics say, they are taking that and just completely discarding it. That is how good they are. Their closest win of the year, outside of Iowa on the road, and I think almost any team this year would struggle against that Iowa team on the road. Almost any. Not all, but the vast majority of them, including potentially your Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, Alabama. Don't know that for sure, but speculation. Their closest win was against Old Dominion in a 27-14 game, where Indiana essentially was in control for 55 minutes of the game, and Old Dominion's undefeated outside of the Indiana game. They made Indiana State look like a D2 team, not just an FCS team. They made Illinois look like an FCS team, putting in their third stringers and second stringers in the game late third quarter, early fourth quarter in that 63-10 drubbing of a matchup. They're 4th in FPI, 3rd in S&P Plus. They're 6th in points per play margin. They are 7th in points per play offensively, 8th in points allowed per play defensively. I do not know where their weaknesses are. The only weakness that I think they might have is because the blue chip ratio has been proven time and time again to be an effective measurement of who's going to win the national title or who can. Their only limitation is probably their lack of 4 and 5 star talent. That's it. And maybe they are one of those teams, such as the Chip Kelly Oregon teams or some of those Chris Peterson Boise State teams, where they can defy that, even sustainably, and punch above their weight class to such a degree that, maybe they are a national title contender this year. I think they are, just now, at least for now, based on how the field looks. There's no team right now that looks to be a GOAT caliber team this year. None. Think about Oregon. Their close win over Penn State doesn't look so impressive after that UCLA game, does it? What about Ohio State? Florida beat Texas in a much more physically dominating way than Ohio State was ever going to in that game. What about the Ohio game? Does a GOAT team struggle that much in the red zone against a MAC team? Or what about Miami Miami almost lost to Notre Dame, almost choked to them at home. They allowed Florida State for a brief moment there to potentially stage a comeback. What about everyone else outside of those teams? I mean, Indiana, they played Old Dominion close. They played Iowa close. They have those talent limitations. It's not like they're littered with first-rounders. Alabama, they've already lost a game. And they've had some other close games too, and they're only 2.5-point favorites over Missouri on the road this weekend. Indiana has a prime opportunity to do something special in this game and in this season. And based on how they are playing so far, where they have a almost 25% success margin rate over their opponents, which is insane. They're first in defensive havoc rate. They force about a fifth of their opponents' plays to be a TFL, a run stuff, an interception, a forced fumble, any type of turnover, a sack, a TFL, a pass defended. They are owning their opponents, especially on defense. Now, offensively, they've had some run-ins, such as Iowa. Only scoring 27 against Old Dominion wasn't particularly impressive, and the defense allowed 14 points basically on 2 plays. Zone reads by a quarterback who's very effective at running the ball from Old Dominion, and Indiana's defense has tightened up. They've looked better and better and better basically every game since that Week 1 Old Dominion game that was a little bit iffy for the Hoosiers. I love their entire offensive and defensive line. So that is Carter Smith, Khalil Benson, Drew Evans, Bray Lynch, Pat Coogan, offensive line. I didn't even need to look at my other computer for the depth chart. I just named you Indiana's offensive line. Defensive line, you got Tyreek Tucker, you have Stephen Daly, Kellen Wyatt, Mario Landino, you have Dominique Ratcliffe, Jose Wheeler, Michael Kamara. Just a splendid defensive line that has underrated depth, and for its talent, has some players who will be playing on Sundays. I know Michael Kamara will for sure. At linebacker, you got Elijah Hardy, Aiden Fisher. You have Isaiah Jones, who I think leads the team or is tied for leading the team in sacks. And then Amari Farrell, Lewis Moore, D'Angelo Pons. Their secondary is better than it was last year. Their entire team is better than it was last year. And they were definitely a top 15, if not top 10 caliber team last year. And Fernando Mendoza looks like a potential round 1, pick 1 quarterback. Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. are wide receivers that won't be first rounders, but maybe day 2 or day 3 guys in the NFL for sure. What Cignetti and his offensive coordinator Mike Shanahan and defensive coordinator Brian Haynes have done in terms of coaching, and what the assistants have done in terms of development, their strength and conditioning, their nutrition, their discipline, their just everything is to the highest possible standard. I think that Indiana is in large part, like off-field program-wise, what Josh Pate pretends Florida is. And then on top of that, instead of having an idiot coach your team in Billy Napier, you have a complete, you actually have a Saban assistant who learned from Saban, whereas Billy Napier clearly didn't learn probably a lick from Saban outside of maybe some of the off-field stuff, maybe learning how to recruit. But that's beside the point. The Hoosiers are one of the best teams in college football. That I am very confident in. Absolutely the case. They're a top 5 team. Now, what makes this particularly challenging and why Indiana is a 7.5-point underdog is because Oregon is also an elite team, and Oregon has more talent than they do. And Oregon, look, they have some weak links, but like the great teams, their weak spots are still filled with great players relative to the average, even Power 4, not just average FBS, but average Power 4 player. Indiana's success here is going to be entirely predicated on what they do at the lines of scrimmage. If they are able to, outside of the first scripted drive, but throughout the game, if they are able to get even minimal push on Oregon's defensive line and they're able to run for 4 or 5 yards per carry, and then they do on defense what they did to everyone on defense, not just this year, but even last year. Their defense played incredibly well against Ohio State and Notre Dame, given the talent limitations. Ohio State couldn't run on them. Notre Dame couldn't run on them outside of one 99-yard run by Jeremiah Love. Outside of that, they averaged, I think, like 2 yards per carry. If they can continue their defensive success that they've had in Cignetti's first 18 games, if they can replicate that and offensively just do a little bit of a better job scaling with top tier talent and improving on that where they failed last year, they can win this game. They may even will win this game. But that's going to be a tall task against an Oregon roster that is so good and is only going to get better from here on out. When you look at their offensive line, so you got Dave Uli, you got Iapani Lololu, Poncho, you have Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, Emmanuel Pregnon, you have Jamari Johnson, Kenyon Sadiq at tight end, Decorian Moore, Malik Benson, Jeremiah McClellan, wide receiver, Dante Moore, who, much like Mendoza, could be round one, pick one of this upcoming year's NFL draft at quarterback. Defensively, look, you have Bear Alexander, you have Amari Washington, you have Mateo Uiagalelei, Tatum Tuioti, you have Bryce Betcher, linebacker, I think Jerry Mixon. See, this is the first time I had to look at the depth chart, but I think Jerry Mixon at linebacker. Yes, I actually got that right, but Devin Jackson's in there with him too. And then you have Ife Obadegwu, awesome name. Theron Johnson, also awesome name. Dylan Thieneman's a pretty sweet name. Oregon could have the all-name team, like all of their starters could. And then you also have Kingston Lopa and Jaden Canady, Aaron Flowers. This is a roster that I think at the end of the year is going to be the best, potentially by a significant margin. The difference between Oregon and Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia is that Oregon across the board, I would say, at many positions, especially the positions where they have the most upside and the positions that require the most upside, especially from a high school recruiting standpoint, they are much younger than a lot of those other schools. So therefore, they have a lot more talent that the staff and those players can, wring out and squeeze out as the year goes on. Oregon's also bigger and better than even Texas on the lines of scrimmage, and that also goes, I think, for Ohio State and Georgia most definitely. They are an impressive machine of an operation, Oregon is. I love what I've seen out of them every single game. They should have blown out Penn State. They should have. Now, I think that in the fourth quarter, you saw some of the defensive, weak links in that Oregon unit, where Penn State, as they got the QB run game involved, and Mendoza, I think, is a more natural runner than Aller. Doesn't have the same, fall over for a few yards or power ability because he's not as big, but he can run the football. And Indiana's offensive line and running back room has performed better than Penn State's has through the 5 games they've played. Penn State was able to lean on that Oregon defense late in the game and eventually break them in that fourth quarter. And it was only because of the awesome 3 quarters that Oregon had that they didn't lose that game, and they were able to take it to overtime, where eventually their superior coaching, superior QB play, superior trench play was able to win the day and close out that matchup. There has been almost no point of concern that I've had for Oregon. And maybe now that Penn State doesn't look quite as impressive as they did, there could be cause for concern. But there's also a part of that Penn State UCLA game that we have to acknowledge is part of an emotional letdown. Penn State probably questioning their identity after yet again losing a big game, and Franklin at the post-game podium saying, yeah, I can't win the big one. That can psychologically break you. I think that the Penn State team that played Oregon was far better than the Penn State team that played UCLA. Penn State, for the entire season, outside of maybe that fourth quarter against Oregon, did not play to their potential. So Oregon got the best of Penn State. I'm not going to discredit that win more than at least correcting for new information. So much like Ohio State, Texas, I'm not going to say, well, since Texas has struggles, Ohio State actually isn't that good. No. They're a top 2 team. Same with Oregon. But now that I have more information about Texas, I can say that win isn't as impressive as I once thought it was. Same with Oregon over Penn State. It's still an impressive win, given who they were at the time, the talent they have, the future NFL production they have there. It's just maybe not as impressive as I once thought it to be. But going over that time zone and physically kicking Penn State's rear is scarred in my mind. I have scar tissue. If you could roll out my brain as like thin little sheets, somewhere in there you can find a, a scar tissue imprint of every time Oregon's offensive line or defensive line mauled the other side of the line of scrimmage for Penn State. It was so stark, so obvious. The Ducks, outside of the offensive line and defensive line, have an NFL QB, NFL tight ends, probably two of them. We just don't quite know about Jamari Johnson as in how freakish she is yet, because Sadiq is that good. Deer Hill Jr. is a wonderful running back, and he's young, so Oregon's going to have him for quite some time. Again, with Oregon, especially at skill position and especially with perimeter play and even somewhat at linebacker, because Jerry Mixon's not extremely experienced. He is a junior, a true junior, but a 3-year player and 2-year player before the season kicked off. The more experience they get, the better they will get. They have, I think, a wider room to improve than almost any team in America, and they're already at the top. That's scary. That is scary. They're second in adjusted expected points added per play. When you look at their success rate margin on the season for the Oregon Ducks, they are among the nation's elite there too. I mean, their success rate margin is only 15th nationally, but a big part of that was because they had to play Penn State on the road. That's a big part of the reason why. And they also, against Northwestern, they allowed some garbage time scores that kind of skew the metrics. I mean, Oregon under Dan Lanning has, especially in the previous 2 years, done this, where they clearly, when the game's out of reach, they load manage in the third and fourth quarter. They did that against Michigan State and Illinois last year. They've done it this year to Oklahoma State, still scored 69 points. Did it to Northwestern, for example. This is an extremely impressive team and operation. They're phenomenally coached. I can't wait to see how this game unfolds. I can't. Because the winner of this game, I think, should be number one. They should be. Even in the power ratings. I have Ohio State, as I'll show in a later segment, number one for now, based on this week. But I do think that given how good Indiana's looked in the metrics and how Oregon, I think, every week is going to get better, the winner of this game will have a strong argument. Resume-wise, I think they'll have the strongest argument to be number one. But in the power ratings sense, I think they will also have the strongest argument. The winner of this game will to be the number one team in America. I actually think that Indiana this year is a real national title contender, and they're going to do a much better job of scaling against the superior talented teams. Much, much better than last year. And for that reason, I do think that when you look at, say, Indiana's pass rush versus Oregon's pass pro, one team will win sometimes, they'll win other times. Some drives will be Indiana's, others will be Oregon's. Same will go with pass defense, coverage, pass rush, tackling in space, pursuit. Same thing with run defense, tackling, penetration, rush offense, penetration, running backs busting tackles, pass offense, wide receivers getting open, sometimes they get locked up. Sometimes the quarterbacks look like Tom Brady and round one pick one. Other times maybe they get, flustered by the defense. I think this will be a very even-Steven game. Very back and forth. Both teams will be very cerebral, very methodical. There will be choices that have to be made. And honestly, preseason, I thought that a close game would favor Indiana. And I do think that to a certain degree it still does here. But while I think Curt Cignetti and his staff are better than Dan Lanning and his staff, I cannot ignore Oregon's overall talent edge and the fact that they're at home. If this were at Indiana, I'll tell you right now, if this were at Indiana, I would pick Indiana to win. Neutral field, I would feel sick to my stomach having to pick any of these teams to win. But it's at Autzen. The line is 7.5, and it hasn't really moved, and that's for a reason. People think this is a accurately priced game, and I think it is too. I think that Indiana will actually cover. I think that Oregon will win by anywhere from a field goal to 7 points, or heck, let's drop it. They'll win by anywhere from 1 to 7 points. But they will win, and at the end of the day, even factoring in home field advantage, while Indiana will be viewed as closer to Oregon than they were before this game, you will view Oregon as clearly at least a sliver better than the Hoosiers. And I believe that gap will only widen as the season goes on because Indiana's an older team. The staff has already gotten realistically almost as much as they can out of this Indiana roster. For Oregon, I think there's still a lot of untapped potential. A lot of it, especially at DB and wide receiver, where they are their youngest. And they're only going to get better there as the year goes on. So give me Oregon to win, but give me Indiana to cover. And I would not be shocked if Indiana wins this game. I'd be a little bit surprised, because when I think of surprised, I think of, oh, wow. When I think of shocked, I think of screeching, throwing things everywhere, or maybe you just kind of sit back in silence for a minute, something, that is a tier above surprising. I'd be a little bit surprised given the travel and the talent edge, and if Indiana overcomes that, then, oh my gosh, like who can't they beat? Who won't? Who will they not beat if they go on the road in Autzen and win here? But I think that Oregon is close enough to Indiana coaching-wise. The difference is just a few millimeters in Indiana's direction, I think. And if I had to go one way with a lot of these matchups, more often than not, I would pick Oregon. I just think they're close enough to where they're within margin of error. That's why I think they're pretty equal across the board. But Oregon's talent plus home field advantage, I think, is an ultimate decider in this game. And there will be several more videos on this game because I think it's the game of the week. It could be the game of the year. It is something that I'm excited for. And I can't wait to watch it. That is going to be 3.5 hours of cinema. As Josh Pate says, it will be a 5 Chalai game. I think it will be a 5-star game. It'll be a 10 out of 10, an 11 out of 10. This is going to be the game of the week. I think everyone should watch this if given the opportunity. Even if you have to take some time away from watching your own team, watch this game. And I could be wrong. If one team's going to dominate the other, it will probably be Oregon dominating Indiana because Indiana has the drastically inferior talent roster. So if I'm wrong about their scaling issues and them fixing that, then Oregon could easily dominate here, win by multiple scores, win by a similar margin as Ohio State or Notre Dame did last year. I just think that Indiana has fixed some of those issues. I think that, yes, it's much harder to win with the roster and caliber of talent they have than when you have Oregon's talent roster or Ohio State's or Alabama's or Georgia's. I do think in this modern era, though, especially since you don't have a Nick Saban and the top teams just aren't as deep across the board as they used to, I think that it's more likely now than ever that there could be a team, only if it's very well coached, though, that could violate the blue chip ratio. And by now more than ever, I mean in the existence of the blue chip ratio. So I think now it's more likely than in the 4-team playoff days. But it's less likely than in the BCS days because you only had 2 teams. If a team with inferior talent went undefeated, they, could get in, for example. I think that if some of those Boise State teams under Peterson, and this happened with some of the Chip Kelly Oregon teams too, if some of the Chris Peterson Boise State teams just didn't lose one of those upset games, they would have gotten in the BCS game. So I think Indiana's that caliber of team, and therefore they're going to play Indiana, or they're going to play Oregon competitively. And if I'm wrong here, one way or another, it will probably be Oregon winning dominantly. But Indiana could also pull a win out of their hat in this game. I have a lot of respect for Cignetti, and I do think that when you factor in development and coaching, they have one of the best rosters in America. Okay. Alrighty, now let's get on to some of these other games here. Let's see what you all have to say in the chat. Thank you so much, by the way. Looks like we do have some super chats that I have to get to. Chris Lane, thank you for the $2 super chat. Really appreciate it. Says, just because. Thank you very much for that $2 super chat. For Justin Ziegler, curious on your thoughts, this theory I heard. Oregon beating Penn State wasn't just a loss, but Oregon took their soul, making them lose confidence. I agree with that, Justin. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that loss broke Penn State. And I thought they would recover from it, at least somewhat, in time for the UCLA game. They haven't. We'll see what they do against Northwestern. We'll see if they recover then. But Penn State, with how the law of averages works and how Franklin's talked about himself after that loss, they're either going to put their crap together and at least earn a signature win. And by signature, I don't mean Indiana at home. Even though Indiana's super good, and I think that they would be a signature win, technically, because of how good they are. You have to remember, they don't have the talent level of Ohio State or Oregon, so it doesn't mean as much, and it's a home game. They're either going to beat Ohio State or Franklin's going to get fired, or he's going to be pressured to leave for another job. That's what's going to happen. And it's all because of what Oregon did. If Penn State wins that game, they can lose to Ohio State and Franklin's still there. But because they lost that game, and then they lose to UCLA in that fashion, he's got to win out or he's gone. Even if they beat Ohio State, say they lose to Indiana, 9-3 Penn State's not getting in. He will be forced to leave because this was the year. I mean, this was the year, and it never materialized. The only way it materializes is if they win out and win it all. Otherwise, the season's a failure. They're not going to Indy. Oregon will go undefeated, or if they lose to Indiana, they'll have one loss and the head-to-head over Penn State. Penn State has 2 conference losses. Indiana, they're probably beating one of Penn State or Oregon, so they'll probably be ahead in the standings. I highly doubt Ohio State loses to Penn State at this point. And even if they do, they could still win all their other games, and they're ahead of Penn State in the standings. Michigan, if Michigan loses to one of USC or Ohio State or wins out, but they don't lose any more games than just one of those, or any at all, they're ahead of Penn State in the standings. You see the problem here? Penn State right now isn't even in the top 2/3 of the Big Ten standings. They're not because of that loss. So, because those losses, plural. So, yeah, I mean, it's bad. It's bad in Happy Valley. Not fun times. But let's move on to talk about USC and Michigan. Let's talk about the Wolverines here and the Trojans. Yeah, my nose is bothering me for some reason. Don't know why, but it is good to be back, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. The fact that we have, 100 concurrent viewers about right now is just absolutely incredible. Gives me a lot of encouragement that we are what we say we are. One of the best operations in the sport, and we're only going to get better from here on out. 15th ranked Michigan takes a long trip out to the Coliseum. The Michigan Wolverines take on the USC Trojans this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Michigan will travel across multiple time zones and face USC coming off a bye. Both teams are 4-1. Michigan's ranked 15th. USC is unranked for some reason. I think they should be ranked inside, honestly, the top 25, top 20 possibly. And from a analytics standpoint, they should certainly be ranked where Michigan is. Both should be ranked inside the top 15 if you're looking solely at analytics. This is going to be a battle of styles here. And it will be a tough task for Michigan to overcome the trip and overcome USC having an additional week of preparation. It will be tough for USC to overcome Michigan's Big Ten style advantage, where Michigan has a better defense. Michigan is good enough offensively to create issues for USC's defense, and Michigan, in theory, should be the superior team in the trenches. There's a lot to unpack here between these two teams that I will argue are still college football playoff contenders. I say that especially with USC. A lot of people have already written them off, but they still are college football playoff contenders. Michigan, I think, is right now in the driver's seat for being a college football playoff contender. They'll be favored in the remaining games they play in except for the Ohio State game, and they won't be more than a touchdown underdog against Ohio State. They're only a 2.5-point underdog here to USC, and that's with it being at night, with the trip, and with it being in the Coliseum, and with USC coming off a bye. So the books here view Michigan as the superior team, neutral field. They just have a lot to overcome here, and USC is still a good team. Let's talk about Michigan here at first. Michigan is the visiting team. USC's playing a host. We'll get to USC later. And Michigan, I think also because they're the ranked team and because of the fact that it's Sherrone Moore's second year and Lincoln Riley's fourth year, I think there's more intrigue around Michigan, and there's a lot more urgency and a lot more tension with USC. So we'll save the climax for the end, and that's USC. With Michigan, their loss to Oklahoma is aging as best as it possibly could. Oklahoma isn't allowing anyone to do anything offensively. They are killing teams with their defense, a defense that is number one in a variety of metrics. Let me list off the metrics that they are number one in, the Oklahoma Sooners. Adjusted EPA per play, EPA per play, yards allowed per play, success rate allowed, only allowing a 23.2% success rate from their opponents, expected points added per drop back, havoc percentage, they're third, 18.5%, only trailing Indiana, who I would say at this point is a top 5 defense, and only trailing Duke. And what is Manny Diaz known for? Causing havoc, causing pressure, blitzing. And that was with Underwood playing his first road start in a night game as a true freshman. Michigan had opportunities to win. Oklahoma dominated, yes, but Michigan kept it respectable and had some good moments there, though not many. Against New Mexico and Central Michigan, they handily beat their bad opponents. They game-controlled Wisconsin, although it was not a pretty win, and they beat Nebraska on the road. Again, game-controlled them, especially in the second half, but it was not a pretty win. USC analytically is better than any of these teams outside of maybe Oklahoma that Michigan's played thus far. In fact, according to FPI, Michigan is a better team than Oklahoma, and USC is a better team than Michigan. We'll find out if FPI is correct or not, depending on how this result goes. But this is going to be a tough challenge and a tall task for the Michigan Wolverines for a variety of reasons here. A, USC's weakness, at least their most obvious weakness, is defensive back. Now, their D-line has not looked all that bright either, but they at least have depth there, they at least have size, and I like their defensive ends and love their linebacker, Eric Gentry. However, outside of Kamari Ramsey and Bishop Fitzgerald, I don't really like what they have at secondary, and the depth situation there is catastrophically bad, and that's probably putting it kindly. Michigan is not a consistent passing offense, though. So unlike Illinois and, say, in Indiana or in Ohio State or in Oregon, who could work, they could work that USC secondary, Michigan drops the football enough with their wide receivers to where I don't know. I don't know if they're going to work this USC defense through the air in that way. And I think Lynn's a good enough coordinator. I think he's actually a great coordinator. And he has good enough safeties when healthy, and Ramsey should be back after that food poisoning bout against Illinois. And great enough linebackers and enough size in the D-line to where they should be able to stack the box and force Michigan to throw. And if you can force Michigan to throw, you can force a few punts out of them. And maybe a few is putting that a little too kindly for the Wolverines. Their rushing offense, I mean, they're averaging 7.7. They're averaging 6.6 yards per carry. That's only 1.1 fewer yards than they earn per pass attempt. I mean, 7.7 yards per pass attempt is not bad by any means, but 6.6 yards per rushing attempt per carry, that's crazy. And a lot of it's on big runs. Michigan is not awesome at power rushing. They're good. They've improved there. They're not fantastic there, though. They're not as good as they were from 21 to 23 in that category. But Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall have home run capability, and their offensive line is clearly better than it was last year, both in pass protection and in run blocking really does help when you have an effective quarterback, to be fair. And Bryce Underwood is right now one of the better quarterbacks in all of college football. He will be playing against one of the few quarterbacks who right now is better than him in Jade Mayavan. The Big Ten actually has a lot of those. The Big Ten, I think, is the conference of quarterbacks this year. You won't run on Michigan. You can get them through the air at times. And it's the same thing with their offense. They are a run-centric offense and run-stuff-centric defense. Oklahoma, even with Mateer's legs, didn't run on them extremely well. Obviously, the inferior opponent struggled to run on them. Nebraska couldn't run on them outside of the first quarter, and that was the same thing with Wisconsin. Really, after your scripted drives, it's very hard to run on this defense. Extremely challenging to run on them. They're going to be playing a USC rushing offense that is averaging around 7 yards per carry. One of the best in America there. That's the offense they're going to be playing. And an offense that is clearly, per the efficiency metrics, if you want to look at game on paper, the adjusted expected points added per play, USC's number one there. They are. When you look at adjusted EPA per play, they're number one by a mile. When you just look at solely EPA per play, still number one by a mile. And they average 7.03 yards per carry. Michigan averages 6.6. So these are two amazing, high potential, potent rushing offenses that you're going to see here. For Michigan, I'm looking at Jayshon Barham, Trey Pierce, Rayshawn Benny, Ano Etta. I am looking at Derek Moore, TJ Guy. What does that defensive line do against a USC offensive line that should have Elijah Page back? Elijah Page is USC's best tackle, missed the Illinois game, big part of the reason why that offensive line didn't look so good. Do they get Killian O'Connor back, their center? And what happens with Jacoby Lane? Is Jacoby Lane finally healthy? Or is he still very limited and is really without a shoulder? As I suspect his injury is shoulder-related based on just how he played in that game, the fact that when he caught passes, he wasn't throwing them back, he was handing them off. Because Michigan's secondary can be got, but if you really only have one target, they're talented enough and good enough there, and I think this will especially be the case as Rod Moore continues to get healthy, to where they can lock down one receiver. They can do that. So they have a massive test here, and Michigan's been pretty bad on scripted drives. So Oklahoma, first drive, touchdown. Wisconsin, first drive, touchdown. Nebraska, first drive, only ends in not getting points because I think Rule wanted to get too greedy, although I think he was right to go on the fourth down there. The reason I say too greedy is a shovel pass? Serious? Like, what are you doing? Like, have your quarterback pass it downfield, run downfield, because with scripted drives, teams have some success running against Michigan's defense early on. Like, do something different. Michigan has not been a great early defense. You can pounce on them and get points on them early. They're better. They get better as the game goes on. So Martindale, his best halves have been second half Oklahoma, second half Wisconsin, really after the first quarter against Wisconsin, but still second half was better than first half. And second half against Nebraska, they only allowed 10 points, and 7 of those came after Michigan was up by 10, and Nebraska was going to need an onside kick to win. You get the point. If you're Michigan, you need to travel well. You need to come out on fire. You need to, out of the gate, establish that you have traveled well, that you take USC seriously, and you need to test their fortitude in the trenches, because Illinois dominated them in the trenches. And Michigan is a better team than Illinois. They have the better O-line, the better D-line, better defense overall. They have the better tight ends. Their receiver one and Donovan McCulley probably isn't that much worse than Illinois' receiver one. Maybe he's even better. And Luke Altmaier is better than Underwood for now, but Underwood's more talented, for example. And Michigan as a team overall is more talented than Illinois. So come out, run at them, and try your best to get pressure on the quarterback and, make Mayavan throw to beat you early. And make him throw all day, behind an offensive line that I think is better than USC's last year, at least in terms of how it fits with Riley's offense, but is not perfect. They're not exactly deep there, so try to wear on them and lean on them. If you are Michigan, what you should be concerned about is that, look, USC's favored, and the reason they're favored is because they have better athletes than you on the outside, so receiver. Mekhi Lemon would easily be Michigan's wide receiver 1. Same with Jacoby Lane. They have 2 tight ends in Lake McCree and Walker Lyons, who are USC's best tight ends in quite some time. They can block their weapons downfield. They will test your linebackers and they will test your safeties. They have multiple options to get the football to. Jordan has breakaway speed, good ability to bust through some tackles, and they're deep there with backup Eli Sanders being a great running back too. Maava can pull it. He can run. He's mobile, has great pocket presence, and he can layer his throws and fit the ball in the tight windows, get it over defenders' heads and right into the breadbasket that is his receiver's arms, and he has wonderful chemistry with Lemon. USC's defense, meanwhile, we've already talked about it. Their weakness ultimately is pass defense. They're just better athletically up front. And we've already talked about that Michigan's rushing attack is dominant because it's explosive. It's not dominant because they always get 4 or 5 yards per carry on you, like the 2023 Michigan unit did. So USC's probably going to force some punts here, and USC's offense, if healthy, is a unit that could give Michigan issues in forcing even 2 or 3 punts on that USC defense. I mean, there's a world here where USC doesn't punt at all against Michigan, and their only missed opportunities are a turnover or a missed field goal or a failed 4th down here or there. That's how efficient this USC offense is. That's how effective they are. And speaking of the Trojans, if you're USC, what you want Michigan to attack the trenches early. I think that's what both teams should want. But if you're USC, you want to hold up. If you're Michigan, you don't want them to hold up. I think both of these teams want to see the same thing out of their. They want to attack the same matchup early, but they want to have different outcomes and they want to play off of that in different ways. So I think if you're USC and the trenches are attacked early, but you can hold up, well, you should throw and run, of course, to keep Michigan honest, see if you can run them, but more likely than not, it will be a problem, and it will be much easier to pass on them. Michigan's defenders, especially in the backfield, have some discipline issues. They're younger there, take some bad angles. They're talented, and with Rod Moore healthy and Yair, Hill, and Barry only gaining more experience, they'll continue to get better. But Lemon, I think, is a bad matchup for any of those defensive backs. And same thing with Jacoby Lane if he's healthy. Defensively, you want Michigan to challenge the trenches, but you want Michigan's offense to look how it's looked in its first 5 games, to where they'll score some points on you because your defense isn't perfect. You don't have the players that you want if you're DeAnton Lynn and Eric Henderson and Lincoln Riley and Bowden, the general manager. But if you force them to punt enough times, you can score. You can just outscore them, and you can overwhelm them and make Michigan abandon some things that are core pieces of their identity, such as, running the football, for example. That's what you can do here. And I know they lost to Illinois and looked pretty bad in doing so, but they had plenty of injuries there, and this is a team that is great when they're healthy, could even be near elite or flirting with elite when healthy. They are very thin, though. They are one of college football's thinnest teams, I would say. And by that I mean their drop-off from starter to backup is among the most severe in college football. I mean, the drop-off is obvious. Even individual player to individual player drop-off can bring down the entire unit. They are that thin. They can't afford injuries here. And that was early kickoff, multiple time zone travel. You were thin. You had last-minute news that one of your best defensive players, maybe your best in Kamari Ramsey, is hurt, your best tackle is dead, and Illinois came out and they played mad, and maybe their best game of the year outside of the fumbles, and that could just be who they are. Their best game includes some mistakes. So I hold that against them in a certain way, but also I really don't, the more I get away from that game. This is a team that can beat everyone on their schedule sans Oregon, because I think Oregon's that good. It's on the road, and they can do what USC wants to do, but better because they're deeper. And also their quarterback's more talented, and Brycen Moore is probably just as talented as Makai Lemon is. He just doesn't have the necessary experience yet. Could even be more talented. We'll have to see. But I love Makai Lemon, love Jacoby Lane, the tight ends that USC has. This is a impressive team, for sure. I believe that the weaknesses here for USC play into Michigan's hands to a certain degree, but they're at home. They're coming off a bye. They have a wonderful QB wide receiver connection, and their strengths play against Michigan's weaknesses. So really what this game is going to come down to is who is better at exploiting the key weakness that these rosters match up well against. This isn't a game where these are two teams that, they're built so similarly where it's just going to be who's better or who plays better that day. Maybe not even who is better. But, or it's not going to be a game where these are two teams where they are different, but their strengths don't match up well with the opponent's weakness on both sides. So it's, an ugly, weird game, or it's a game where, again, with the prior example, it's just who plays better that day. This is a game where given how Wink Martindale on opening drives is not awesome, and Lincoln Riley with a week to prepare with this offense is going to be as awesome as they can be, given how the 4-2-5 Ravens defense that Michigan runs, they like to bunch up at the lines of scrimmage. They like to show a lot of pressure and then back out of it. They like to play off cover with their corners, and Riley will love those screens. He'll love that play action. He'll love picking apart Michigan with 1,000 paper cuts. And given how USC, I don't think against a competent rushing attack can stop a nosebleed. I don't think they can. Yeah, they have, and if you're a USC fan, don't take offense to this. They have size, and that matters. That's a good thing they have. They didn't last year. It's not translating though. Keyshawn Silver was bad at Kentucky. Didn't translate here. Just didn't. Bear Alexander, look, he's playing well for Oregon, but he was not good at USC. I do not blame USC for letting him go. He wasn't playing well there. And I don't think he's Oregon's best defensive tackle still. That goes to Amari Washington. And given how Penn State's offensive line has looked, I don't know. I probably overrated that unit for the entire preseason. So they are making progress, but this is a Michigan running back room that has speed, elusiveness. They don't fumble the football. They have great ball carrier vision, and they can hit the hole, and they can bust some tackles, and they can stiff arm you, and they can get yards after contact. They can do it all. And it's an offensive line that isn't perfect, but is getting better as the year goes on, is better than the unit was last year. And when they bring in tight ends and they're disciplined, they will make you pay. So that's not a good matchup for USC either. Michigan, in theory here, should be able to run for over 200 yards, as long as the game doesn't get out of hand early. So again, back to the point that I was making here. This is a game that will be decided by who can better exploit their opponent's weakness. Because both teams have massive advantages that they can utilize, that they can pinpoint, that they can surgically pick apart. And I honestly, let's be real here, guys. Who's the better coach, Lincoln Riley or Sharon Moore? And after you answer Lincoln Riley, because that's the only honest answer one could give right now, a bye week is going to only enhance that further. It's only going to. I think Michigan's actually the better team here. And that's why they're only 2.5-point underdogs, despite having the travel, USC having the bye, and USC being at home. Neutral field, Michigan would be favored by 1.5, maybe even 2.5 themselves. If Michigan were at home, this would probably be above a field goal point spread in their favor. And Michigan would be confidently viewed by the books as the victor if they were to host USC. I think with the bye, with the fact that, look, USC, I do think is slightly inferior to Michigan, but not inferior enough to where it's going to cover up the coaching advantage and home field advantage and the potential jet lag that Michigan is going up against. So I think that USC is going to win here. I think they're going to win in a very close game, and they're going to cover. They're going to win by anywhere from, I think, 3 to 10 points. It could be a game where USC wins by double digits just because they're able to score and Michigan isn't, and they pull ahead early or maybe pull ahead late. Michigan, I think, should win, looking at the fact that they'll control the lines of scrimmage here, and they are the better overall team. And I think that if this game were played later in the year, but same location, I think Michigan would win. I think Michigan has a lot more room to grow because they're deeper than USC is, and they are more talented. And I think they're more talented at the positions that matter the most. So trenches, quarterback, receivers, the only area that I think really matters the most that USC's more talented in. I mean, Michigan's more talented at DB, like factoring in corner, nickel, and safety. If you're only looking at safety, Bishop Fitzgerald and Kamari Ramsey have been fantastic there. I'm picking USC to win, to cover. I think it's going to be a bounce-back game. It'll be close, and I think at the end of the game, you'll be saying to yourself that Michigan is the better team, but USC was just better able to take advantage of those matchups. They made the better coaching decisions, and they just had a home field and travel advantage that, much like how all that played in Illinois' favor and allowed them to win close, this time these factors will play into USC's favor and allow them to win close. If I'm wrong, the most likely outcome of me being wrong is that Michigan straight up wins here. I think that they're the better team. I also could be wrong on that venture, but looking at the trends, where these teams started out and where they've been going ever since, I think that Michigan's a bit steadier. They're better able to respond to injuries, and they have more room to grow. And USC is just another injury away from being what they were against Illinois, and not who I think they will be in this game when they're healthier, which is, surprisingly, when healthy and when depth isn't a massive factor, one of the better teams in all of college football. All right, now Nebraska and Maryland. Let's see if there are any more super chats here. Let me see. Got any more super chats? Just checking. Oh, I do. Slap Happy, thank you for the $5 super chat. Fight on. We better not suck this weekend. We should have won last year. We did not. Part of it is hedging, if I'm being honest. I do. The more I look at this, I think, and I might change this when I do the deep dive, because I am making more videos on this topic. Tomorrow, for example, there will be a 10 reasons why each for USC and Michigan that I'll do on the live show. How do I put this? Michigan should win, because Michigan should be able to control USC, and the defense, with how they've improved ever since week one, just bit by bit every week, while USC's regressed bit by bit on defense. They should be able to force enough punts and make Maeva uncomfortable enough to be the team that pulls away in the end. Michigan should win just on paper, but you have to remember, these are human beings. Coaching plays a role, and travel sucks. Anyone who travels knows that adjustments take time. That's why Michigan's leaving on Thursday, not Friday. They're trying to get ahead of this thing. We'll see if that makes a difference. It should, but will it be significant? I don't know. I mean, it's another few hours, another day. Your whole bodily clock isn't going to 100% adjust to that. So that's a factor. The coaching advantage maximized by the bye is a factor. USC's receivers are a factor. So USC probably can put together a more sustainable offense than Michigan can. And defensively, look, I think that D'Anton Lynn is a great defensive coordinator. I don't know if he's as good as Wink Martindale. Preseason, I thought he was better than Wink. But as the years gone on, I don't exactly know. I just think that, USC can probably stack the box a little bit, and with the unreliable receivers, they can force punts even if they get beat. And if Michigan gets beat, USC's receivers aren't going to drop the ball, So there's just a lot of outside, more human factors that I think favor USC here. The paper and the analytics, I think, scream Michigan. If Michigan had Mekhi Lemon, they win this game by 10. I would think. If Michigan had Mekhi Lemon, they could be a national title contender. That's the gap between Michigan's receiver room and the receiver rooms of other teams that have their roster talent, for example. Let's move on, though, and talk about Nebraska at Maryland, and then we also have the Red River Shootout, I believe, or maybe it's the Red River rivalry. I think it's Red River Shootout. Whatever. We'll talk about Nebraska, Maryland, and then move on out of here. The Nebraska Cornhuskers, fresh off a win over the Michigan State Spartans, take on the Maryland Terrapins, who are coming off a home loss and a really ugly choke job loss to the Washington Huskies. They led Washington 20-3 for the majority of the game. Actually, or led them for the majority of the game. At one point, it was 20-0 in the third quarter. They lost 24-20. Maryland is at home, thankfully, with a chance to redeem themselves after that loss. Nebraska will be traveling on the road, and the Cornhuskers are a 6.5, you heard that right, 6.5 point favorite. This will be a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time game this Saturday on the Big Ten Network. Hopefully Jake Butt's calling it, but I don't know if Jake Butt is calling it. What I'm curious to see between these two teams is how real are their defenses. I think Nebraska answered the bell, and we'll talk about them first here. I think they answered the bell quite well, if I do say so myself, against the Michigan State Spartans. Now, Michigan State put points on the board. They scored 27. They at one point led 21-14 and looked honestly like the better team for probably half the game. But Nebraska being at home, Nebraska getting the blocked punt early, gave them enough wiggle room to establish themselves as the better team at the end. And a big part of the reason why they did was their defense. Their defense impressed me in that game. Again, I know 27 points, but Aiden Childs is a great QB. Smith and Lindgren are great offensive minds. They had to be 4 of 5 on fourth down to even get to 27 points. And Michigan State, I thought they would run the ball pretty well. They didn't. Nebraska did an admirable job slowing down their rushing attack in that game. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but Childs was their rushing offense. I mean, they held Michigan State to 2.3 yards per carry. Mekhi Frazier, Michigan State's best back, only averaged 3.6. Nebraska, despite taking more sacks, averaged more yards per carry. They had 3.3 yards per carry. Emmett Johnson had 6.4 for 3 touchdowns. That was impressive to me. I mistakenly picked Michigan State to win that game, thinking they would win the rushing battle. They competed in the trenches in a much more impressive way than I think most college football analysts or Nebraska people thought, but I was too far in the other direction. And at the end of the day, Nebraska established themselves as the more Big Ten-like team. It was a really underrated win because you're coming off a bye. Rule historically is not perfect off the bye. Smith is historically better than him off the bye. And Michigan State had some advantages to exploit, and they didn't. And other times they did, but Nebraska was just able to respond like that and take advantage of Michigan State's errors. It's a really impressive performance overall. I view that as a big win for Matt Rule in Nebraska. Honestly, I kind of view it as a program-changing win. I know it's against a Michigan State team who may or may not go bowling at this point and who will struggle to get there, but Nebraska usually loses those games. Last year's team loses that game. Every Nebraska team since 2016 at least, if not since the final Bo Pelini team in 2014, loses that game. And Nebraska came out on top. That was really impressive. For the Cornhuskers, what you want to do here is you want to see if your defense with a light box can stop this Maryland rushing attack. If you do, you could win by 30. Maryland can't run the ball to save their life. You have been bad at run defense, but this is something that I thought of today for Nebraska. Hear me out. Michigan's third in America in yards per carry. And a lot of those yards against Nebraska came off of well-blocked, explosive plays where Michigan often played off Bryce Underwood's mobility. They had some success with power rushing, some, but if you look and watch that game, they didn't have a ton of success with running up the middle and establishing themselves in power rushing. They had some, but it wasn't like every time they ran the ball, they got at least 5 or 4 or 6 yards per carry. Sometimes Nebraska stuffed them at the lines of scrimmage, sometimes. But Michigan was able to get those big home-hitting runs because their receivers blocked downfield and were more physical than Nebraska's DBs in that regard. Nebraska was out of position at times. And Michigan, because they're bigger and more athletic, when they pull block, and that gives their offensive linemen some momentum to, push the defensive linemen and linebackers around, well, they can just shove them down or put them in their place because they're bigger, more athletic. If you're Nebraska and you're playing a rushing offense like Michigan, the last thing you want is for Michigan to be able to develop and be patient on the ground and let the blocks develop, because size for size, athlete for athlete, you're never going to beat them. You want to snuff that out really quickly. And when Nebraska couldn't, it ended in a disaster. Not exactly the same with Cincinnati, but kind of similar. Michigan being a better version of the Cincinnati team that Nebraska played. But look at Cincinnati this year. Cincinnati is 9th in yards per carry. They average 6.7. So what if Nebraska just played 2 top 10 rushing offenses, and while their rushing defense is certainly not top 10, it's probably top 50, top 40. Could even be top 30, top 25, because let's be real here. Top 10, the 10th best team is typically much, much better than the 25th best team. There's typically, a drop-off historically from, the 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 zone, and then, 4 to 10, and then, 10 or maybe 11 or 12 to 25. That's the tier 3. Tier 1 and tier 2 are beginning to merge, but your 12th to 25th best team is still significantly worse typically than your teams in the top 10. So what if Nebraska's defense ain't bad, but they've just faced some pretty poor matchups in terms of size and in terms of what Cincinnati and Michigan want to do? Maryland, we'll talk about it in a bit here. They're outside the top 120 in a variety of rushing categories. They do not have a good offensive line. Their running back room is not inspiring. They lost their best back, Roman Hemby, to Indiana, and he's looked stellar there. Nebraska, I wouldn't say they're strong up front defensively, but are they weak there? After that Michigan State game, I don't think so. I don't. I mean, Deshaun Singleton at safety played extremely well in that game. I think that for Nebraska, Riley Van Poppel, Cam Lenhart, Keanu Davis, Javin Wright, Dasan McCullum, Marquise Watson-Trent, they impressed. Holding Michigan State when, even adjusting for sacks under 4 yards per carry is impressive because they've been good at run blocking. That was a good showing. It was a good effort by Nebraska and that defense. They're 11th, too, in passing success rate. This is offensively, thanks to Dylan Ryle at quarterback, Ja'Cory Barney Jr. at wide receiver. They have a 52.3% passing success rate, and they only allow 3.39 yards per drop back, which is first. You can thank Deshaun Singleton, Andrew Marshall, Sear Wright. You can thank Marquise Buford Jr. You can thank Malcolm Hartzog. It's a group that is entirely made up of seniors, except for Andrew Marshall, and Wright is a day 2 NFL draft pick. After that Michigan State game, and with how Cincinnati was able to bully Iowa State in the trenches, and Iowa State with Dominique Orange and Caleb Bacon, they are not soft. I mean, you saw what they did to Iowa's rushing offense. Iowa was able to run on them successfully for 3 quarters, but not the way Cincinnati did. And we've seen Michigan. Wisconsin's defensive front, I've said this since week 1, is very impressive. Michigan was able to create a big run and at the end of the day have some power rushing success on the ground against them. That's admirable. Nebraska's played, no shame, they can't control their schedule. They've played awesome rushing attacks, and they just didn't have the size, physicality, or athleticism yet, and maybe even some of its scheme, maybe they had some schematic errors there to deal with it. But for everyone else, I think they're going to do somewhat of an admirable job on the ground. My issue with Nebraska, my only issue with them, honestly, after the MSU game, I don't even think their D-line is their biggest weakness. It's their pass blocking. They really struggle protecting the quarterback, whether it's Elijah Pritchett, whether it's Gunnar Katula, Teddy Prohaska. Their tackle situation is rough. And Dylan Raiola does have a tendency to hold on to the football longer than he should. So that's a bad combination. On top of Raiola being mobile enough to, make awesome plays in the pocket, but not mobile enough to be extreme rushing threat. And then Nebraska's offensive line is not great at run blocking either. So that allows pass rushers to tee off and not have to think about stopping the run. They can pursue right out of the gate instead of having to figure out whether pursuing would be a mistake, because then they're allowing a wide open lane up the middle, or sideline to sideline, whatever. Nebraska's offensive line is the thing that's holding it back. I honestly think after watching this team play, the defense is probably a bit underrated. The offense, I wouldn't say it's overrated, but it definitely has some weaknesses that I didn't think it would preseason, and weaknesses that could cripple it even against pretty mediocre teams. So Maryland, for example, and this is where we'll move on to the Terps here. Maryland is not a phenomenal team by any stretch of the imagination, but they're strong on defense, and they're playing host, and they're good enough offensively to make it a game for Nebraska. That's why Nebraska's only favored by 6.5 points here. Maryland's viewed about as close to Michigan State as you could possibly view them. I mean, think about it. You have a 6-point swing from hosting your opponent to playing them on the road. You do, because home field's 3 points. So Nebraska, in theory, would be favored by 12.5, 11.5 points here. Exactly what they were favored over Michigan State by. And the difference between Maryland and Michigan State is Michigan State's wonderful on offense, but disastrous on defense. Maryland's the opposite, at least analytically. Michigan State in actuality is just good offensively. Same with Maryland on defense. They're just good, above average. I think Michigan State personally is a better team than Maryland, but this game's being played in Maryland's turf. There is a little bit of travel here with Nebraska, and I think Maryland can match up well in some regards with the Cornhuskers. That being their run defense. I mean, it's hard to run on Maryland. I mean, Maryland's defensive front against Wisconsin sort of looked like Michigan's when you factor in the overall game. They had some issues against Northern Illinois, and look, I think Michigan is a better defensive front than Maryland. That's not what I was saying. What I'm saying is the fact they were able to, at times, look like a Michigan caliber front. And analytically, they've at times been perceived as an Ohio State level front. Again, not saying that, just saying analytically, sometimes those things can lie, means there is some substance to that unit. This being a 3:30 game, I don't know if Maryland Stadium's going to be full. I know it was against Washington. Don't know if it will be for this game. I do know that with what Maryland has been able to do defensively, they will have some opportunities to take advantage of the Cornhusker offensive line. I think they could, in theory, make Nebraska one-dimensional offensively, make Raiola have to carry the team, and he can, but you'd rather have to make him carry the team than allow a balanced attack that can march up and down the field all over you. And then offensively, that's where the matchup really begins to take issue. Really. I mean, Maryland is 19 sacks through through 5 games. They're averaging almost 4 sacks per game. That's pretty good. But you have to score points if you want to win. And Maryland is 132nd in rushing yards per carry, averaging 3.52. They're probably not going to run on Nebraska's defense. And we've already discussed Nebraska's first nationally in yards allowed per pass attempt, and I think they're second or maybe third in expected points added allowed per pass attempt. Maryland is the best in terms of defense and making sure that you don't get big plays on them, and they force a lot of punts. They get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Their strength, ironically, historically under Loxley, their defense has been strong in the secondary. They have Jalen Husky, who's really impressive. Kevin Humes is impressive. But I think more importantly is that defensive tackle and defensive end group. So Zahir Mathis and Sidney Stewart, who are phenomenal freshmen, Nasir Taylor, they've hit on a lot of their freshman defensive ends, which is pretty incredible. And then Cam Rice, Dylan Fontes, Daniel Owens, Ian Thomas on that defensive tackle group. And then you got Daniel Wingate, Trey Reddick, Keyshawn Flowers at the linebacker spot. That's their area of strength defensively. And then you have, again, Jalen Husky and some of those DBs who are still strong, but it's so interesting. Maryland lost, Levon Johnson to Texas, Kellen Wyatt to Indiana, and Wyatt's had some success in Indiana. Johnson hasn't cracked the rotation much, and it feels like Maryland upgraded there despite losing a lot. It's kind of cool to witness. Maryland's offensive line, it's probably better than Nebraska's at pass protection, but gosh, that run blocking is something that I cannot ignore. That is so bad. So unbelievably bad. To be outside the top 130 in yards allowed per carry is just, it's an atrocity. And I honestly think Nebraska, on top of having the better overall team, is better coached. I think that their defense will lock down Maryland's offense overall. The only thing I question is Maryland this year has been good at defense overall, especially run defense. Nebraska's not been all that great at running the football. And Maryland has 9 interceptions and a forced fumble, and they're averaging almost 4 sacks per game. So they could get some turnovers off Raiola and eventually maybe open that defense up like a can opener. Maryland could play the can opener game. You sit back, you wait for the cans to roll your way. The turnover, the can, in this analogy is the defense, it rolls your way because, well, the offense just made the defense get on the field by giving it to your defense. And your offense can function as that can opener, being very patient and maybe cracking that Nebraska defense. But that's going to take a lot. And Nebraska's favored by 6.5 points despite it being on the road for a reason. So give me Nebraska to win and give me them to cover. I think that Minnesota is going to be a tougher test. Offensively, because they can run the ball better, and I think there's a world where they could even pass the football better. Also, it's a Friday night game. It's going to be Nebraska's second road test. I actually don't think Minnesota's even that much better than Maryland. I think there's actually a good chance Maryland's better than Minnesota. Minnesota's an awful football team, but Fleck's a better coach than Loxley, in my opinion, although I think Loxley up until last weekend did a really good coaching job. He's sent in a lot of his freshman recruits. That guy knows how to recruit. He knows how to, I think, build sustainable success. Maryland's just a hard job, and last year they had some issues. Still do this year. But again, they're Maryland. I think Nebraska is in year 3 of Matt Rule. I picked him to go 10-2 preseason, and I kind of went away from that, picking Michigan State to beat him, just because I didn't like what I saw. But I still thought they would win, 8 games, maybe a dip down to 7, but I was kind of thinking 8, or maybe with how Penn State was performing, 9, and you just lose 2 early games and then mostly win out. The Michigan performance is aging better. The Cincinnati performance is aging incredibly well. I think the Michigan State performance will age well, too. And Maryland, look, they're not coached to the same degree Nebraska is. They don't have the same talent. Nebraska has the better QB, running back, They're weak on the O-line. They're much stronger there than Maryland is. They're better at receiver. They're better at tight end. They're better at DB. Linebacker's probably a push. Maryland's probably much better on the D-line. And then special teams is easily Nebraska. And Maryland doesn't have the matchup with their offense to properly utilize their D-line versus Nebraska's O-line. Maryland's D-line in this game, I would not be shocked if they were almost incapable outside of a few plays of exploiting their D-line versus Nebraska's O-line advantage. Because Nebraska defensively should be able to entirely lock down this Maryland offense. So give me the Cornhuskers to win. Give me them to cover. And I think that they will move on to 5-1, and that Minnesota game is going to be a very exciting game that I'll also be previewing here on College Football with Sam. Okay. Gosh, I forgot to get to the standings. Shame on me. I forgot to get to the standings. That's not good. That's really not good. Why didn't I do that? Oh, well, I think that I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that I forgot to discuss the standings. I mean, both these teams have already lost a game, and Nebraska will probably be an underdog to USC. There's a chance they're an underdog to Iowa. They're definitely going to be an underdog to Penn State. And Maryland's going to be an underdog to a lot of teams remaining. Let's make sure I didn't miss any super chats. Oh, I got some good ones. Fantastic. Quo Vadis, all I want for Thanksgiving is a win over Boo. Who is that? Who's Boo? I don't know who that is. But thank you for the $5, Quo. I appreciate it. TAKL Farms, GBR don't bet against us this week. Oh, I'm not. Even if Michigan State beat Nebraska, I would have picked them to win this game. Because I think Maryland's a total paper tiger, and I don't think they're well coached. Michigan State, I think it can actually punch above their weight class in a way that I think Maryland would really struggle to do. Thank you for the $20 super chat, TAKL Farms. Thank you for being on here. Really appreciate all the super chats and all the engagement and support, guys. Let's move on and talk about Oklahoma at Texas. Undefeated Oklahoma, 6th ranked, 5-0, only played one SEC game, but it was a win over a good Auburn team. They're underdogs to Texas? The same Texas that just got pushed around by Florida? The same Texas who lost to Ohio State and is unranked. They already have 2 losses, and a loss here puts them out of the playoff picture, or any loss puts them out. They're projected to go 8-4 per FPI. Well, that's the reality of college football, guys. That's the reality. You don't abandon priors and preseason research and numbers like that. You don't do it. And at the same time for Oklahoma, well, they've been impressive, and they should win this game. Oklahoma's had some close wins. You know, the Michigan game, they had a real chance to pull away and make that a dominant win. Oops. We decided to muff the punt. We decided to turn it over, to miss the field goal, to have some really bad penalties. Auburn, you needed a trick play to win that game. You did. There's no shame in that, but Auburn, while a good team, is not a national title caliber team. And if that game were on a neutral field, Auburn wins on that day, given how both of those teams played. And as for Texas, look, they outgained Ohio State. There's a world where they beat that team in Columbus. The Florida game, there's not much of a world where they win that game with how those teams played. If you were to replay that, Florida wins close to 10 out of 10 times in that specific setting. But regardless of that, this is the Red River rivalry. Neutral field, Dallas, Texas. Texas is favored by 2.5 points. Josh Pate put out on Twitter a post saying that Mateer playing, like fully playing with complete confidence that he will be playing, the line will be set at Texas minus 1.5. If he were out, the line would be set at Texas minus 5.5, which is pretty significant line movement. Regardless, Texas would be favored, which tells you the books think that Texas is the better team. So let's explore that. Is Texas the better team? I want to start off with Oklahoma here and kind of make the case for the Sooners, and then we can get to Texas. So Oklahoma's undefeated. They're ranked 6th. they're power rated anywhere from top 10, top 5 to barely inside the top 15. There's a lot of varying opinions on Oklahoma, a lot of them. I'm in the middle of the extremes. Some think Oklahoma's just top 20, top 15. They're nice, they're good, great, no. Others think they could win it all. I'm in the middle. I don't exactly think this is a national title caliber team. I do think they could be an SEC championship caliber team because many other teams have lost SEC games already, and Oklahoma's schedule sets up to be nicer than I thought it would be preseason. You know, LSU is kind of who I thought they were preseason. Alabama is a little bit better, but still Oklahoma can get them. Oklahoma's better than I thought they would be preseason. Tennessee is a little bit better. Ole Miss is about what I thought. South Carolina's worse. Texas is worse. And they beat Michigan. They beat Auburn. And they controlled Michigan. And they did enough against Auburn to have an argument to be the better team here and now. So the Oklahoma Sooners, led by John Mateer, and it sounds like he's going to try to play, that is their offensive identity, is John Mateer. Look, they have some other good players. So they got Blaylock in the backfield. And I like what they have at wide receiver with Keontez Lewis. I like what they have with Jaron Kanak at tight end. But this is a John Mateer offense, straight up. Without him, they don't have a whole lot. Michael Hawkins Jr. is a pretty significant downgrade. That's why he's trying to come back and play in this game, even though it would probably be advised for him to rest another week. That's why. Not saying he shouldn't. I'm just saying the surgery was only 2 weeks ago, and the timetable was like 3 to 4 weeks. So Oklahoma needs Mateer in this game to win. A healthy Mateer, I think, is better than a healthier Arch Manning. But Manning, I know, is playing. I know Manning is better than Michael Hawkins Jr., and Manning could be better than a Mateer who's banged up. Torrey Blaylock looks great. Deion Burks, Isaiah Satenga, Keontez Lewis. Great wide receiver room. Michael Fasusi, their left tackle, is their best offensive lineman, I think, already. Really impressed with his caliber of play. And defensively, Oklahoma's defense is number one in a variety of categories. So I think they're strong everywhere. I think they're gettable at corner. But this roster that is Marvin Jones Jr., Dominic Williams, David Stone, Grayson Halton, Jaden Jackson, R. Mason Thomas, Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, Kendall Daniels at the cheetah position, Peyton Bowen. I'm really impressed with what they've done. This is a unit that, look, they are number one in adjusted expected points added per play. They're number one in yards allowed per play. They're only allowing 3.7 yards per play from their opponents. Now, Michigan was not as good when they played them in week 2 as they are now, especially on offense. Auburn is clearly limited offensively, like clearly limited. But these numbers are still insanely impressive. And they get pressure. They are physical at the point of attack. That's why they got 10 sacks nearly on Auburn. That's why Michigan couldn't run the ball on them at all outside of really one long play. They produce an 18.5% havoc rate, which is third. Could even be first after this coming weekend, honestly. And they do enough offensively with Mateer, who's an absolute gamer, and the receivers they have to score on opponents and to beat them. Now, they do allow an 11.5% havoc rate offensively, which is 77th. That's not good. And that plays into what I was saying earlier, where Mateer is their offense. Without him, they have an offensive line that struggles in run blocking. They don't have amazing running backs, and their receivers and tight ends, while good, maybe even great, just aren't elite. So there's a lot of inherent limitations whether it's depth or player upside or even how the starters are built on the O-line or running back room. Their rushing offense isn't spectacular. There's enough built-in limitations to where I will say the ceiling of this team is limited. I don't think that this team is a national title contender. I don't. I mean, there's a chance, for example, I don't think Michigan's a national title contender. But with Michigan, I can at least count on their offensive line and their rushing offense. And they're deeper offensively than Oklahoma is. At the end of the year, Michigan could win the rematch, hypothetically. And I don't think Michigan is a national title contender. What about, Auburn? I mentioned earlier, Auburn. They're not a title contender. They could have won that day. And that was at Oklahoma. I'm not trying to be negative with Oklahoma. Don't mistake that. I would love to see Oklahoma with that schedule go 12-0. It would be incredible. And what a comeback story for Brent Venables and Oklahoma. What a moment. But their defense is going to have to win them this game. What you want to see if you're a Sooner is first pass attempt, or not even that, just first play. Oklahoma's D-line immediately moves that Texas O-line. Immediately. So run blocking, they get behind him or even push him back. Pass rush, Manning has 2 or 3 seconds to throw, gets hit, dropped, and you see him wince a bit. That's what you want to see. And you want to see Texas be anxious offensively. You want to see them panic because you're doing that well in controlling them in all phases and aspects of the game. What you do not want, you do not want Texas to reliably cover your receivers. And you do not want Manning playing an A game, which you can minimize the chances of that happening by putting him under immense pressure. But if he is able to play like how he did at times against Florida and against Sam Houston, and not as he did the first 3 games, that combined with Texas, say, limiting Mateer's passing offense and Ben Arbuckle's, that would result in a Texas win. And that is where I think, in all honesty, I understand why Texas is the favorite here. I think that Oklahoma has the strongest non-negotiable of these teams, and that is their defense and their defensive coaching. But I think that Texas is a more balanced, diverse team. Their outlets of being able to attack you are more plentiful than Oklahoma's are. If Texas is able to wake up one day and play to their potential, they can run on you and pass on you. They can also stop the pass. They can stop the run. They can get home with Colin Simmons. They can force fumbles. They can read your defense like a book or offense like a book with Michael Taff. They can use Manning's legs. And Baxter has proven himself as a running back to do some things on his own. They can get their tight ends involved. With Oklahoma, if they play to their ceiling, they still will not run all that well on you. And they probably still have some, not a lot, some questions in pass defense, specifically at corner. So Texas here, a big part of the reason why they are favored is because they have the higher ceiling. And also because Oklahoma's shown its floor at times, and so is Texas, and their floors aren't all that different. I mean, that Auburn game for Oklahoma and the Florida game for Texas, they had some differences, but say you put Oklahoma on the road at Auburn, like say that happened. There's a world where Auburn, takes control of that game and they come out being the victor in the trenches, because switching up home field advantage can do that to you. It can, especially with Auburn's offensive line issues. These teams have shown who they are, I think, through 5 games. And I think Oklahoma right now, with a healthy Mateer, and by healthy I mean 100%. With 100% health, John Mateer in Oklahoma would be better than 100% Arch Manning in Texas. I do think that. Straight up, I do. But Texas is deeper, and Texas can better sustain some adversity in different areas than I think Oklahoma can. So if you shut down Texas's rushing attack, they have a good enough QB, good enough receivers, and tight ends to pass on you. If you shut down their passing offense, as Ohio State did, they're big enough and physical enough and athletic enough at running back and even QB run to move in between the 20s on you. That's what the Ohio State game was. Oklahoma, if you shut down their passing attack, I don't quite know what they do. Especially against a Texas defense that is, outside of maybe Auburn, going to be the best defense they play all year. And I mean, LSU could be in that conversation. It's certainly going to be, along with Auburn, the best defense they've played so far. And you're not hosting Texas as you did Auburn and Michigan. You're playing neutral field against Texas in an environment that both you and Texas are very familiar with. So if you're the Longhorns, what you want to do is you just want to contain, I think you want to contain Mateer. And you can, I think it's almost a given that you will stop their halfback, running back, rushing attack with a light box. You just want to contain Mateer, make sure you get some pressure, which has been a struggle for this Texas unit. I think Oklahoma will probably fare pretty well in protecting Mateer. You want to try and get pressure on him. And then offensively, you know what I would do? I'm not a coach, so I'm going to correct myself there. It's not what I would do. I think that Texas, knowing their defense can hold up well against this Oklahoma offense, will try to run early and see what they have. And if they need to put the game on Manning's back, they will. And plays will be there for Manning. But if they need him to take over, they'll let him. But why do that? Like, challenge your offensive line. Yeah, they looked bad against Florida. Doesn't mean they're a bad unit, though. So, Anthony Hill Jr., Michael Taff, Ty Anthony Smith, Hero Kanu, Cole Brevard, Ethan Burke. Sounds like Malik Muhammad's out for the season, from what I heard. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section below. It's very sad. Texas is good enough players to step up. They have depth, and that's an area where I'm concerned with Oklahoma in, actually, is I don't know, in truth, how much depth they have. I don't think they have a lot of it. Looking at the matchup, I think both defenses have an edge over both offenses. I think the overall teams right now are pretty even as it stands, but I think Texas is the higher ceiling, and I think Sarkisian and his staff right now are, I'm questioning this a little bit. I think there is a chance that Oklahoma, if you count Venables twice as a head coach and defensive coordinator, I think there's a chance Oklahoma has the better coordinator and head coaching trio. A chance. But I think Texas's assistant staff is still better, and I still like Sark over Venables for now. So the coaching going Texas's way, the overall team, I think right now is pretty even. But if you had to make me choose, it would be Texas, and I think Texas is deeper. Plus, Texas has more avenues to attack just the average opponent than Oklahoma does because they're more balanced. Leads me to pick Texas to outright win here, which isn't an upset. They're a favorite, and I think they're the favorite for a reason. It's going to be an exciting 3:30 game on ABC. Going to be another game along with Indiana, Oregon that I'm going to be paying attention to. I'm going to more so be paying attention to Indiana, Oregon. But this game we'll be paying very close attention to as well. I like, it's not even that I like Texas more in the trenches. I think the trenches here are going to be pretty even. It's the fact that I think Texas in areas besides the trenches, so coaching and outside play, and even in between the tackles. So Manning has the potential to be a better passer than Mateer, and Texas is the better running backs and the more athletic linebackers. So they have more avenues to create, I think, the explosive play, the big play, than Oklahoma does. And it's not like Oklahoma has a better avenue to create the more sustainable play than Texas does either. So for that reason, with Texas having more potential in terms of hitting the explosives, but I think also having a better roster built for this matchup to create sustainable drives, I like Texas to win, and I like them to cover. When looking at the standings of this matchup, before we move on, I believe that this game does not change the path for who's in the driver's seat in terms of reaching the playoffs. I think that Oklahoma's path to reach the playoffs is easier than Texas's because Texas already has 2 losses. And I also think because I strongly believe that Oklahoma will be favored against Mizzou and LSU at home. They'll be favored against Ole Miss. With a healthy Mateer, they'll be favored over South Carolina, probably favored over Tennessee. I think that Oklahoma has a much better chance of getting to the playoffs than Texas. I might even say because they're already a game ahead in SEC standings and they have that strength of schedule advantage, I think that there is a chance they even have a better path to get to Atlanta than Texas, even with a loss here. Texas is to play Texas A&M. They have to play Georgia on the road. That's not going to be fun. They also have to play Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt's going to be a headache for anyone to play. Oklahoma's lucky that they don't play Vanderbilt, even though their schedule overall is tougher than Texas and SEC play. Vanderbilt's going to be a headache for a lot of teams to deal with, especially after the way Texas looked in the trenches against Florida, especially. Nonetheless, I think Texas in this game wins and covers because I think they match up better with Oklahoma and have a more sustainable path to victory and scoring points. And that's almost it. Not quite. Gosh, I hate that the stream's going much longer than I wanted. At this point, we're not going to get out of here until 11. That's not what I wanted to do. Not what I wanted to do. But we can spend just like a few minutes here talking about these games. These are games that I'm not as interested in talking about, so segments will be much quicker. And then we'll get on to my playoff predictions, brief reaction to the AP poll, top 25, and my playoff bracket. Number 8, Alabama, travels to undefeated 14th ranked Missouri. And Alabama's only favored by 2.5 points. Really? I understand that. I think that both when you look at how these teams play, when you watch them, and also when you look at the analytics, it makes sense why this is such a short line in favor of the Tide. Missouri is a real, legitimate team. They are an SEC title and college football playoff contender. Now, that may sound a little bit crazy, but bear with me here. Missouri in the analytics and the statistics is performing at a fairly high level. Bo Perbula's looked pretty impressive for Missouri. Their lines of scrimmage, Ahmad Hardy at running back, and then their defensive line, Zion Young, Damon Wilson. They've been impressive, Missouri has, at running the ball, stopping the run. Their defense is legit. I think that this is going to be a competitive game, and some people have been saying that Alabama should just run away with this. You're ignoring the warning signs. So warning sign number 1 is that short line, but warning sign number 2 is look at the rushing numbers. So Alabama is averaging 3.9 yards per carry and allowing 4.7 yards per carry. Missouri is averaging 5.9 yards per carry and only allowing 2 yards per carry. Now, those aren't adjusting for sacks, but Alabama doesn't get pressured all that much. Perbula gets pressured quite a bit. Like, Alabama's better at pass block than Mizzou is. Mizzou's better at run block than Alabama is. And they definitely have the better running back and a QB who's more inclined to run because Drinkwitz wants him to run more than DeBoer wants Simpson to run. This is a fascinating game here. Missouri being at home, coming off the bye. Alabama's played 2 physical games in a row. So at Georgia, than hosting Vanderbilt. Now you got to travel to Missouri, who's coming off a bye, and Drinkwitz is known to be a good coach. I don't like this spot for Alabama. Now, that doesn't mean they can't win. It doesn't mean I'm not going to pick them to win. Alabama with Ty Simpson, I think, is the best QB here. I think that Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams are better than Kevin Coleman, who's Missouri's wide receiver one. And while Ahmed Hardy is better than Jam Miller, Alabama's offensive line has gotten better week over week over week. They played the physical game Vanderbilt wanted them to play. They beat them at it. They beat Georgia on the road. That takes guts. That takes toughness. That takes physicality. And I think Georgia is a better team than Missouri. And Georgia, they dominated the rushing battle over Alabama. Still lost, and at one point Alabama was dominating that game. So the Tide, they should be favored here. They absolutely should. And by the way, little error there. The defensive players from Missouri and Alabama should be switched. Just wanted to make sure you all knew that I knew that. Obviously, Tim Keenan III is an elite defensive tackle for Alabama, not Missouri. And Chris McClellan is a fantastic defensive tackle for Missouri and not the Crimson Tide. Obviously. My apologies for that. Very, very confusing that was. And I think this game will be confusing. I think it'll be back and forth. I love the potential for this to be a shootout of different styles. Missouri having a lot of success on the ground. Alabama having tons of success through the air. I think that Missouri is going to be the rushing defense and rushing offense team here. They're going to dominate on the ground. Alabama will dominate through the air. I do agree with the polls and the power ratings that Alabama's the better overall team. Right now, especially after that Georgia performance, the Vandy performance, I would lean towards Alabama having the better staff, but it's close. It's closer than a lot of people would want to admit. Drinkwitz has done a phenomenal job as the head coach of Missouri. Missouri is one of those schools, along with Oregon, that just hits on their portal additions year over year over year over year. They got elite scouting and elite development in those categories. That, along with the fact that, hey, if you can control the ground game, you can keep Alabama's air attack off the field, is why I'm picking Missouri to look, and why I'm picking them to win here. I think that the Tigers are going to have a fun time on the ground. I think they're going to average 5 yards per carry, maybe even more than that. And they're going to eat Alabama's run defense alive. Alabama won't be able to run on Missouri probably at all. And while they will have their shots through the air, they'll have their wins through the air. I think Missouri's live here because I think they'll be able to keep Alabama's offense off the field, put all the pressure on Alabama for much of the game. Well, Missouri's coming off a bye. They're going to play loose. Alabama, they've played 2 physical games in a row where they had to keep their starters in until the end. Mizzou's coming off a bye, and Mizzou is a team and roster when you factor in coaching and development, their roster punches above its blue chip ratio. So I think they're live here. I love them. I think they're going to win. I think they're going to cover. This is going to be the upset of the week. Shame it's a noon game, but even then I think Farrett Field is going to be very rowdy, very loud, and a fantastic environment. Can't wait to see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. Regardless of this game, I think Alabama is still an SEC title contender and a national title contender, regardless of whether they win or lose. It's just a tough spot for them, and Missouri selectively, I think, can play like a top 10 team. Throat's itching a bit. My apologies. We'll talk about Georgia-Auburn now. And then hopefully we'll get it out of here before it hits 11, and then I will get these videos out immediately. Still got 95 concurrent viewers. That's insane. And over 1,000 views. This is awesome. This, I think, is actually the best stream I've ever had. Honestly. And the graphics, I think, definitely play a part in that. But let's move on. Talk about Georgia-Auburn. Let me know in the live chat. I'll read over it. If you want to see shorter versions, like how I just did a 5-minute preview and prediction, if you'd like to see those for the previous 5 games where I talked about them for longer because I had more information and wanted to talk about them longer, I might do that. They'd be very brief, maybe even briefer than this, but they'd be made nonetheless. Probably won't need to do that because we got the 10 reasons why videos and then other videos for those games. But anyway, time to move on for Georgia at Auburn. The Deep South's oldest rivalry. A rivalry that has given us the prayer at Jordan-Hare, that gave us a 2017 series where Auburn dominates in the regular season, Georgia dominates in the SEC title. Georgia has controlled this game for a while. They have not lost since that 2017 game. And yet, the hatred and the anger and the desperation have never been more plentiful. If you don't believe me, tell me with a straight face that Auburn can afford to go 0-3 in SEC play, and Hugh Freeze keeps his job, and some of those nice wide receivers, nice defensive players, and their DC, DJ Durkin, don't leave for shinier, healthier, greener pastures. Tell me that with a straight face. You can't. You can't do it. You cannot honestly do that with how this team has looked. They played Oklahoma and A&M within a score, and they got physically pounded. If they lose this game, the odds that Hugh Freeze is here next year slip from shaky, maybe mildly confident, to discouraging, to unlikely odds. Georgia's favored by 3.5 points here. They're the 10th ranked team. Their only loss is to an Alabama team who I think is a national title contender and who has the argument to be power rated number 1. Auburn's 2 losses are to Texas A&M and Oklahoma teams who are combined 10-0, both ranked top 10, and according to some, both power rated top 10. I think the odds that one of them is certainly power rated top 10 are pretty high here. Looking at these teams and what they bring to the table is quite fascinating. I think that both of these teams are really strong defensively, and that is their identity. However, what I will say is that I believe that Georgia has some problems at secondary that Auburn could take advantage of with their receivers, Malcolm Simmons, Eric Singleton Jr., Cam Coleman. If Arnold is protected and can throw, that's all on his center, Connor Lew, Xavier Champlin. Georgia can match what Auburn does on the defensive front, but secondary for Georgia, they have issues there. They've had issues defensively this season. Same with last season. Offensively, I think that on paper they were built to do similar things. Both have strong wide receiver groups, quarterbacks with questions, but enough upside and legs to make things happen, solid offensive lines and running back groups. Auburn's offense is a total disaster, and Georgia's, while I think is better than last year, they definitely downgraded at quarterback. I think Beck with this Georgia offense would be phenomenal with that supporting cast. He would be incredible. The key players for this game, I look at Georgia with Christian Miller, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, K.J. Bolden, Jonel Aguero. Can they get the same pressure on Auburn that A&M and Oklahoma did? Can they? If yes, then Georgia wins. Although, to be fair, Auburn on the road has played those teams within a score, despite that trench mismatch. But I think Georgia's better than both those teams, and especially so offensively. And with Georgia, can you run the ball? Like, Auburn has prided themselves on being awesome on the defensive front. You can't run on them. Your quarterback can't escape from them. Can Georgia establish themselves as the more talented team everywhere offensively? and maybe give this Auburn defense fits that it hasn't had since the Baylor game. And for Auburn, again, can you protect Arnold? Because if not, you're probably losing. And can you not just protect Arnold, but maybe even get right? Can your offense have a get right game against this Georgia defense? Sounds shocking, almost sounds heretical, that you would get right against Georgia's defense, but Georgia's defense hasn't looked the same since 2022. 2023, they regressed. They regressed more in 24. I think they've improved on the defensive front compared to last year, but they've regressed even more at secondary. This unit does have some issues to work through. Georgia, look, they're the more talented team, but they're playing on the road in a rivalry game. The last time they were here, they nearly lost to Auburn in Hugh Freeze's first year. So that, along with last year's game where Georgia won by multiple scores, but Auburn outgained them, these staffs are familiar with each other. They have some matchup edges over each other that they are going to exploit. I do think that this will be a close game. My big issue here is I think Georgia's defense is going to lock down this Auburn offense. I don't think that their disadvantage in pass defense is going to matter that much here, because while their corners and safeties will get beat by these Auburn receivers, Arnold won't be able to hit them with the pass protection that he has. And while I think A&M and Oklahoma have better pass rush than Georgia does, Georgia's better run defense, and they're stronger on the defensive front than those two teams are. So I think they'll make Auburn really one-dimensional, and the game will be entirely on Arnold's back. Don't trust that. Meanwhile, Georgia offensively will do enough with their receivers and QB and running back room, because I think they have the more balanced offense to move the ball enough to get enough points, so that with a superior staff and a deeper and more talented roster, they will come out and emerge victorious. So Georgia wins. I think that the Bulldogs cover as well. It will be another year where Auburn won't get right against Georgia. And I don't know if this game is exactly a referendum on Hugh Freeze, but if you lose this game, you have got to probably win all but one of your remaining games. And with how this offense has looked, and Hugh Freeze is this offensive guru, that's what we've been told, and I do think that he is a great offensive mind, these struggles are even more disheartening. But I don't think that even with Georgia's defensive struggles, that with the way Auburn's offense is played, they're going to have a get-right game against this unit. Georgia will win. Georgia will cover. All righty. All righty. How about that? We are almost done. So close. So close. I'm actually going to get a drink of water. I've been live too much. Typically, in the future, guys, by the way, I'm pretty bad at this. In the future, I do want these streams to be like an hour 30 at most. We're going to reach like 3 hours here because I couldn't shut up about the first two games and added like anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes of talking to the first four. Oh, well, I'm known for the deeper dives anyway. But yeah. Yeah. The goal is to keep these to like 2 hours at the most. Hour 32 hours. The reactions will probably be briefer, and then I'll go back the following day, and maybe for 1, 2, or even 3 games, I'll do a more in-depth reaction. But yeah, I need to get a drink of water. So I'm going to go get that drink of water, and then I'll be back. I'll react to the AP poll for like 5 minutes, and then I'll talk about, for the remaining time, my power ratings, which will be like 5 minutes, and then my college football playoff bracket, which will be like 10. So I'll see you guys very soon. Just getting a drink of water. Okay, we're back. Maybe these streams are meant to be 2.5 hours, since I only am gonna do 3 of them a week, and then the fourth, which is the reaction one, those are all gonna be short, because reactions, they there's a lot more to talk about before the games, I think, than after the games, because there's more unknowns, there's more hypotheticals, more ways you can bounce. And there are very rare exceptions to that. The exceptions are the big games that are competitive. Those deserve like 20, 25 minutes for reactions. Or like crazy, maybe a crazy upset, even. That one, I definitely wouldn't go longer than an hour 30 or 2 hours for the reactions. You can already see the circles in my eyes. Anyway, though, let's get on to my reaction to the Associated Press Top 25. The AP Top 25 had some tough decisions to make after UCLA beat Penn State, Florida beat Texas, after Miami beat Florida State and Oregon was idle, and Ohio State dominated a Minnesota team that just did not have the same level of respect from the voters as Florida State did, and for good reason. They weren't power rated nearly as high. So a lot of opportunity for change, for shifts in the rankings, and I wanted to go over this Week 7 Top 25 poll, the AP poll, and give my thoughts on it, who I think the most overrated, underrated, properly rated teams were. That's what I want to do here, and I think that the best place to start off with that is to, well, show you the AP poll Top 25 right here on the screen. So we have Ohio State at 1. I'm just going to list them off for you, even though you should be able to see them if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify or other sources, well, I'm reading them off for you. Number 2, Miami. Number 3, Oregon. 4, Ole Miss. 5, Texas A&M, 6, Oklahoma, 7, Indiana, 8, Alabama, 9, Texas Tech, 10, Georgia, 11, LSU, 12, Tennessee, 13, Georgia Tech, 14, Missouri, 15, Michigan, 16, Notre Dame, 17, Illinois. This is where the list begins to get interesting. 18, BYU, 19, Virginia, impressive overtime win over Louisville, 20th, Vanderbilt, they deserve to stay ranked, 21st, Arizona State, 22nd, Iowa State, 23rd, Memphis, 24th, USF, 25th, Florida State. How is Iowa State still ranked and Cincinnati isn't? That team went on the road and beat Kansas at their own game. They should have beaten Nebraska. Like, should have. And Nebraska's a damn good team. How is Florida State ranked ahead of Nebraska? How are they ranked ahead of Cincinnati, for crying out loud? Like, I'm sorry, but Virginia's above average. They're kind of like the Illinois of the ACC. And that means they're just above average or even average at best, because Illinois is a above average good team, Power 4. They're a good Big Ten team, and the ACC is far worse than the Big Ten. That's kind of what jumps out to me right here, is we have a problem with Iowa State being ranked, and yet Nebraska and Cincinnati aren't. I'm approaching this from a merit-based perspective. I might also approach this from a power ratings angle, but I want to really keep this to strength of record, or what I perceive strength of record to be. Because that's what this poll, along with the college football playoff poll, that's what those are meant to measure. They're not meant to measure power ratings. Otherwise, 3-9 Nebraska in 2021 would have finished ranked top 25 if you were solely basing this off of power ratings, which I'm not. But even from a strength of record aspect, Iowa State, they beat a Kansas State team who sucks. It straight up sucks. They beat an Iowa team who already has 2 losses and who doesn't look much different from prior Iowa teams. Yes, they crushed Arizona. They barely beat Arkansas State, though. their resume isn't different from Cincinnati's, and Cincinnati beat them head to head and kind of dominated them. As for Florida State, they have 2 losses, one of whom's to a Virginia team that lost to a bad NC State team, mediocre NC State team. How are they not behind Nebraska or Cincinnati? Notre Dame, I don't really disagree with them being at 16th, even though they're 3-2. They've played one of the tougher schedules so far, and they lost by a combined 4 points, an average of 2 points per game, to number 2 undefeated Miami and number 5 undefeated Texas A&M. So I don't have a problem with them being there. USC beat Michigan State, beat Purdue, dominated the non-con. They lost by 2 points to 17th ranked 5-1 Illinois, whose only loss is to 5-0 7th ranked Indiana, who's top 5 per almost every power ratings, or per every power rating system that has respect. How is USC not ranked? I know that Florida State has that win over Alabama, who's 8th with a 4-1 record, but they have a loss to Virginia, and their score against Miami was not as close as the final score indicated. A lot of those points, 19 of them to be exact, were in garbage time. So I just don't get it. Like, how aren't Nebraska, USC, and Cincinnati ranked here? How aren't they? Look, Arizona State, their one loss is to a good Mississippi State team, but a Mississippi State team that probably isn't top 25. That's their one loss. They had a win over TCU. They have won their other non-con games. I question whether or not maybe we're ranking them based off what they did last year and preseason assumptions and the thought process that, Mississippi State is a great team because they play in the SEC, when, look, they're much improved. I love what I've seen out of them. But Arizona State, do they really have the 21st best resume? Really? Look, I think that a lot about this poll is correct. I do think that if I want to be more nitpicky towards the top, Indiana resume-wise, I think is stronger than Oklahoma. Beating Illinois 63-10 is more impressive than any win Oklahoma has, and they're both 5-0. I understand Oklahoma played a tougher non-conference slate. I get that. I would also beg the question, how would Oklahoma fare if they played Iowa on the road, and would they beat Illinois 63-10? Now, to be fair, would Indiana beat Auburn, or would they beat Michigan? I think that's more likely than Oklahoma dominating an Illinois team who's undefeated outside of that one game Indiana played with them and dominated them in that matchup. A&M at 5-0, I mean, they beat a Notre Dame team who's really good. Maybe my one issue with them is outside of the Notre Dame game, the non-con wasn't terribly impressive. I will say that the way they beat Mississippi State was impressive. That was legit. Ole Miss, on the other hand, this is the last thing I'll say here. I have a big issue with Ole Miss being ranked 4th. Ole Miss has played Tulane and LSU and Kentucky. How is that impressive? Oh, Arkansas too, but they only beat Arkansas by 1 possession. In no way is Ole Miss a top 5 team. They're probably not even top 10. Like from a power rating standpoint, outside of LSU, who's still clearly overrated at 11th, they're still living off that Clemson win that means nothing. They haven't beaten anyone of substance. LSU and Ole Miss are very overrated. Very, very overrated. I know this isn't power ratings, but think about a strength of record standpoint. LSU's wins are over, what is it? 2-3 Clemson, right? Right? Like 2-3 Clemson. Louisiana Tech, Southeast Louisiana, and 2-3 Florida. Those are their wins. Congratulations. And 2 of them were by 1 score, essentially. Essentially. That Florida game was 20-10, but 7 of those came off a pick six. Or Ole Miss. Where's Ole Miss's signature win that I'm looking for? The reason they're ranked this high is the same reason they're power rated high. Because of priors, not anything that relates to this year. They do not have an impressive resume. They don't, at least compared to the surrounding teams in the top 10. As for Ohio State, Miami, Oregon, I think you could have either one of them at 1, 2, or 3 from a resume standpoint, and you wouldn't be wrong. From a power ratings angle, Miami shouldn't be second, but these aren't power ratings. This is strength of record. I think that the most overrated team on this list, the most overrated teams, let's go with teams, plural. Ole Miss at 4th, LSU at 11th. I would go with Iowa State at 22nd, and I would go with Virginia at 19th. The most underrated teams from a strength of record perspective, I would go with Alabama. I do think Alabama from a strength of record standpoint should be ranked over some of the teams ahead of them that are undefeated. Just Florida State, week 1, Florida State's a top 30, top 25 power-rated team, do have a good enough strength of record to at least receive a lot of votes. They beat Vandy and Georgia, who are undefeated outside of playing them. They made Wisconsin look like silly putty, and they're power-rated highly, which can give them a tiebreaker with their strong strength of schedule over some undefeated teams ahead of them. I do think that Nebraska, Cincinnati, and USC should all be ranked, so they're underrated here. I also believe from a resume angle that Indiana is probably underrated. They, just with how they've looked and how they've played opponents, and also based on how the AP poll works, they should be ranked higher than this. A final team that's overrated, and I hate to say it because I love Brent Key and Haynes King, is Georgia Tech. Their signature win is over Clemson, and Clemson sucks. So I don't know how good they are. I certainly know that from a strength of record angle, especially since Colorado's also bad, they are not the 13th strongest record, 13th strongest team by results in America. All right, let's talk about my power ratings. This will be a pretty quick segment that I'm excited to share with all of you. I'm going to give you my top 10 teams in America by how I think they would be favored over the average college football team. So, power ratings. This is basically what I think ESPN's FPI or S&P Plus or any other respected power rating system that is objective should be. So these are my subjective power ratings. One day I hope to have a computerized power ratings, and I would love to compare that along with my personal ones. But for now, we just have the subjective ones to go off of. So here are my top 10 teams by how they would be favored on a neutral field. Let's kick this off by revealing my 10th best team and moving down from there. That's Oklahoma at 5-0. And this is right now. This is not how I think it'll be at the end of the year. I will actually say at the end of the year, I do not think Oklahoma will be in this top 10. I think there will be other teams that leapfrog them, and due to some concerns I have with Oklahoma's depth, I think they will get pushed down a little bit. But I love Grayson Holton, David Stone, Marvin Jones Jr., R. Mason Thomas. That defensive line's a non-negotiable. And then Kip Lewis at linebacker, Peyton Bowen at safety really help anchor that defense that is number one in almost every statistical category. Then you got John Mateer, a quarterback who, when healthy, is a Heisman caliber QB. Really fun to watch. An underrated player on that team is left tackle Michael Fasusi, who's played well, graded out in the 70s per PFF. Right now, I think they are the 10th best team in America. A team that would be ahead of them is Notre Dame at 9th. This one I hate because I think that Notre Dame's defense is kind of trash given the talent they have. And I really get annoyed when people say that Marcus Freeman is like teetering on being the best coach in America. You don't hire Chris Ash if you are an elite coach. You don't. If you are an elite coach, you do what Ryan Day did. You take a gamble on Patricia, who's been much more proven than Ash. If it fails, it fails. If it succeeds, which it has succeeded, well, then you've hit a pot of gold. Freeman didn't do that. And I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, that really irritates me. So I hate that I have to put them here, but I have to because they're good. Their offense is a top 10, top 5 unit. CJ Carr is balling out. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price look really good. The offensive line, I don't know if it's as good as it was last year, or if it is, but because Carr isn't nearly as mobile or elusive as Leonard, that they just aren't as intimidating to opponents. Like the rushing attack isn't as intimidating. The sack evasiveness isn't as intimidating, so defenses can play Notre Dame's offense more honestly. But Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse, love the offense they have. And then defensively, look, I mean, you miss Xavier Watts, and this team defensively just isn't what it was last year, not even close. But you still have Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, and some nice players at linebacker and D-line to, beat up on most of the teams that you're going to play all year or that you could play anyway. Like there aren't 10 teams better than Notre Dame right now, so I have them at 9th. Looking at 8th, I got Texas. I know. Another 2-loss team inside the top 10. Believe me, Penn State's in my top 15. And there's a chance they'll be in the top 10 at the end of the year, too. Yeah, I just can't overreact to one game. I mean, honestly, after that Ohio State game, Texas should have been power rated over Ohio State. Like 6 times out of 10, or 7 times out of 10, based on that week 1 game, Texas probably wins. The only reason they're not in that category is because ever since then, it feels like Ohio State stayed the same or gotten better, and it feels like Texas just continues to trip over itself, like they have 2 left feet. I love what I see out of the defense. So, Alex January, Hero Kanu, you also have Purdue transfer, why am I blanking on his name? Cole Brevard, and then Ethan Burke, Colin Simmons, Lifo, and Ty Anthony Smith, and Anthony Hill Jr., Michael Taff. Defense is electric. O-line, this is probably Kyle Flood's worst O-line outside of maybe the 2021 unit. And Arch Manning, I just still think is not playing to his potential. And this is the least talented wideout group that Texas has had for a while. That Florida game was Sark's most concerning game since the early part of his tenure. Might be his most concerning game ever as a Texas head coach. 7th is the rival of Texas, Texas A&M. I will say at the end of the year, I do think Texas will be power rated over A&M in my personal power ratings and in the power ratings that are computerized, like the ones that are the best. However, right now, I like what I'm seeing out of A&M more than Texas. I think their offensive line is better. I think the defense for A&M is closer to Texas's than Texas's offense is close to A&M's offense. Marcel Reed has clearly upgraded. I love what they have with Terry Bussey, Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver. It's a great wide receiver group. And defensively, Taurine York is one of the best linebackers in America. The blanket, Will Lee. There's a reason they went on the road and beat Notre Dame. They're a good team. They're one of the more impressive teams in America. Certainly a playoff contender, an SEC championship contender. Georgia is my 6th power-rated team. It's Kirby Smart. It's the fact their offensive line and offense as a whole is better. And the defense with Christian Miller, with C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, K.J. Bolden, Jonah Aguero, Dalen Everett. they have good enough players everywhere to be one of the nation's best teams. And unlike Penn State and Texas, I have not watched them get de-pantsed by an inferior opponent. So I think their floor is higher than those teams, and their ceiling, let's be real here, I think their ceiling is similar. I mean, Alabama did a pretty good job against them, and Georgia still nearly won that game. And I think Alabama is one of the best teams in America, as you will see here in a bit. 5 is Miami. Miami isn't higher because I think that they... How do I put it? I don't entirely trust Cristobal, and I think that there are portions of the offense and defense, more outside play, so like secondary and wide receiver, that are thin enough to be gotten by to be gotten by either the elite passing offenses or elite passing defenses. And while their trench play is extremely impressive, I've seen Oregon. Oregon is just as good in the trenches as Miami is. Indiana, talent-wise, hell no. They're not as good as Miami in the trenches. But the advanced analytics suggest they very well could be. And I think that those teams, for examples, have already teased some of the teams that are ahead of Miami, including Indiana, who's my 4th power-rated team. Their coaching or outside play make up for maybe some things that Miami either matches them in or could have an advantage over them in. Yeah. Not a strong argument again. Again, this is subjective, and I think once you get inside the top 5, it's pretty tricky. There's an argument for Miami to be number 1 in strength of record. In power ratings, I have a very tough time seeing that. Indiana, I think, is an easier time because they've been so dominant in a variety of their games. And the Iowa game, tell me a team that would go on the road and beat Iowa by more than 2 scores, outside of maybe Ohio State and Oregon. Maybe them. And maybe Alabama, too, because Alabama is one hell of a team. One hell of a team. That's why they're 3rd in my power ratings. For Indiana and Alabama, I love Ty Simpson. I love Fernando Mendoza. I love their receivers. Omar Cooper Jr., Elijah Surratt for Indiana, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, and Ryan Williams for Alabama. Love their offensive lines. Pass blocking. Love Indiana's more in run blocking. Indiana in pass blocking does not have the freaks that Alabama has, like Caden Proctor at tackle. Indiana, in terms of metrics, if I were solely going off of those, I'd rank them ahead of probably everyone, outside of maybe Oregon. But Alabama has talent that Indiana just doesn't have, so that's why they get the nod. And it's the same thing with my final 2 teams, Oregon and Ohio State. Oregon, I'm going to say this straight up, I think at the end of the year will be the number 1 power-rated team. I think there's more room for Oregon to grow than any of these teams, with the exception of maybe Notre Dame and maybe Texas. Outside of those, Oregon has the most room to grow from where they are right now. Oh, Penn State would be included there, but Penn State's not in my top 10, so it's just a side note. Same thing with Michigan. They're not top 10, but they have a lot of room to grow. It's a theme with a lot of these Big Ten teams, and then Texas and maybe Georgia, some of the more relative to preseason expectations, maybe some of the disappointing SEC teams and Big Ten teams have a lot of room to grow. Oregon isn't disappointing. They have more room to grow than anyone on this list. So I think they'll be number 1 at the end of the year. But what Ohio State's done so far and how surgical they've been in all of their games is something I just can't ignore. And I trust Ryan Day to manage a game better and hold on to a lead more than I do Dan Lanning. Those are my top 10 teams. Again, we got Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, Indiana, Miami, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma. Those are my top 10 from number 1 to number 10. Keep in mind, these are power ratings. These are not rankings. If these were rankings, I would not have Texas or Notre Dame in my top 10, probably let alone top 15. Wouldn't have them there. Now, we can get on to the final item of the day. Then I got to export these. And you know what sucks about that? I'm not going to get all these videos out tonight. I'm going to have to save some of them for tomorrow, which it doesn't really suck, but I kind of wanted to get them all out tonight. But since the show's going on for 3 hours, I can't do that. Anyway, though, let's get on to the college football playoff bracket. My college football playoff predictions, and then we'll close out the show. Before that, though, just in case anyone has sent me some super chats, I don't want to ignore them. I have not received any more. Okay, we're good to go. Here are my college football playoff predictions following a chaotic Week 6. An uber chaos-filled weekend with Penn State losing to UCLA, with Alabama and Vanderbilt playing each other competitively, with Texas losing to Florida, and Oklahoma and Indiana sat on byes, same with USC, with A&M and Mississippi State playing each other. It was just a lot of chaos that happened this weekend. Florida State and Miami, not really chaos, but, definite weeding out of the pretenders and the contenders for the college football playoff. These are the 12 teams that I think will reach the college football playoff as it stands entering Week 7. Here we go. Oh boy, I messed that one up. I messed that one up. That's okay. We'll do a rerun here. Here are the 12 teams that I believe will reach the college football playoff as everything stands right now entering Week 7. So Texas, they lost to Florida, kind of got the doors blown off of their roster by the Gators. Penn State, I didn't think after that Oregon game was even going to make the playoffs based on how Indiana and Ohio State looked and how Penn State looked against Oregon. But losing to UCLA further solidified my belief that, yeah, this Penn State team probably isn't going to reach the playoffs. And I changed my mind on some other things as well, but let me just show you the rankings here anyway. How I think that this is all going to shake out. So entering Week 7, these are the teams from seeds 12 to 1 that I think are going to participate for the national championship trophy. So at 12th, I have Memphis winning the American. Yeah, I think Memphis will win the American. Think that they will be the G5 representative. I have USC going 10-2. Beating Michigan this weekend is my prediction. We'll see if I'm right. I think they'll lose to Oregon, but beat Michigan, Notre Dame, Nebraska, Iowa. I think when healthy, and it sounds like they're getting healthy, that they're a top 15, top 10 team. They'll be represented here, playing on the road. I got Michigan also at 10-2, occupying the 10th seed, losing to USC, but beating everyone else, including highly touted, power-rated number 1 and ranked number 1 across the board, the Ohio State. I have Oklahoma at 9th, going 10-2, losing to Texas and Alabama, but beating everyone else. Finally getting to some of the home teams, I have a rematch going on in the 8 versus 9 seed game. So I think Missouri beats Alabama this weekend. Their only loss is going to be to Oklahoma on the road later in November, and they'll host Oklahoma in a playoff game, in a first-round playoff game. They'll stand at 11-2, losing to Oklahoma later in the year, and then to the SEC champion that we'll get to in a few minutes or seconds. At 7th, I have Indiana going 11-1, losing to Oregon, but beating everyone else, including Penn State, Purdue, Michigan State. Not really many notable teams left on the schedule after Oregon outside of Penn State, but I have them beating Penn State and everyone else but Oregon. At 6th, I have Georgia, 11-1. They lose out due to tiebreakers to Missouri, so they'll go 11-1 but not play in the SEC title game. That's because Missouri beat Alabama, but Georgia did not, so they have a common opponent in which Missouri beat and Georgia didn't, and per the rules, that will push Missouri to Atlanta, and Georgia won't go to Atlanta. And then my 5th seed's Ohio State. I have them losing to Michigan at the end of the year and then losing in the Big Ten Championship game to the Big Ten champion, who we'll get to here shortly. Looking at the first round buys for my college football playoff predictions, Alabama, SEC champion, 11-2. They're going to lose to Missouri, per my predictions. We'll see if I'm right again. Could very well be wrong. They'll lose to Missouri, but then win out, and they will beat Missouri in a rematch in Atlanta. Third, I have undefeated Texas Tech. They're going to kill everyone. Per dominance metrics, they might be the best team in America at the end of the year, but again, it's just per dominance metrics. If you factor in the strength of schedule they play, I don't think they'll be the best team in America. That D-line with, Lee Hunter and David Bailey and Romello Height is insane, and then Jacob Rodriguez behind them at linebacker. If they're going to go undefeated, own the Big 12, they could be a threat in the playoffs. Seriously, they could beat someone or two with the talent they have and how they've been playing ball. Number 2 is an undefeated Miami. Florida State, I think, was one of their final tests of the year. Don't see anyone else who is going to beat them. Doesn't mean someone won't beat them, but as of right now, I don't think anyone will. And then number 1 is Oregon. Oregon, I have them winning out. They'll beat Indiana. They will beat Washington on the road. They'll beat Ohio State in a rematch of the Rose Bowl game and the Big Ten championship game to be the Big Ten champion back-to-back, and that means they wouldn't have lost a regular season game since 2023, which is pretty insane. So now that we have that out of the way, I want to turn my attention to talking about for a few seconds each these matchups and how I think they would go. So I think Ohio State would destroy Memphis. No brainer there. I do think that Missouri being at home, and with Missouri, I believe they're deeper than Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma, and this is something that I think they have in common with their ex-head coach, Lincoln Riley, his team in USC. They're very thin. Starting roster-wise, if healthy, they're one of the best rosters in America, but depth is a major concern for them. I think Missouri's deeper. I think Missouri's one of the few teams that could handle Oklahoma in the trenches, and they play host to them. I just think Missouri would win that game close, move on to play Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Georgia hosting USC, I kind of think that's a no-brainer too. For Oklahoma and USC, the longer the year goes on, the harder it will be for them to play to their ceiling because of their depth. Georgia hosting them with the time zone travel, the coaching edge, the roster edge, that home field advantage, that's a Georgia win right there. And then Indiana against Michigan. Michigan will get better as the year goes on. Kind of the inverse, I think, of USC and Oklahoma. But Indiana, I think, is so far ahead of Michigan and most of the teams, even in this bracket, that with home field advantage, they would beat Michigan. They would be handily better than them and control them throughout all 4 quarters and all phases of the game. So the quarterfinal matches would be Ohio State, Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, Missouri, Oregon in the Rose Bowl, Georgia, Texas Tech in the Cotton Bowl, and Indiana, Miami in the Orange Bowl. Let's see how I think these play out. So I believe Alabama would beat Ohio State in a very close game. The logic behind that is I think that Kalen DeBoer is probably the best head coach in the country when it comes to game planning against top teams. There's a reason he's undefeated against Kirby, Sark, and Lanning. And I think that Simpson and that offensive line and pass pro and wide receiver group is good enough to get some throws on Ohio State. Meanwhile, I believe Alabama's defense, they're awesome when they don't have to play a mobile QB. Guess who's not a dual threat QB? Julian Sayin. Like in high school he was, in college he's not dual threat. He'll have things against this Alabama defense. This will be a very competitive game, but I'm siding with Alabama here. Oregon beating Missouri, I don't think needs much explanation. Just look at the dominance metrics. Oregon would be favored by double digits. They'd probably win by more than that and cover the spread. Georgia, Texas Tech is fascinating. Texas Tech's been playing better than Georgia, but I know Georgia inherently has more talent and better coaching, so I sided with them there in the Cotton Bowl. But I really considered picking Texas Tech to win that game. Indiana and Miami's very tricky, similar to Ohio State and Alabama. I think Cignetti is a better overall coach than Mario Cristobal. I think Indiana's staff is superior. And Mendoza, We'll see if he's better than Carson Beck. Right now, I would probably say yes, but I don't know because Carson Beck's been balling out and he's confident. Miami is the more talented team here, but Indiana's been playing better looking at the efficiency metrics. And they've taken a larger rise in the power ratings. And if I'm right about Indiana being able to scale against talent in a much better way than they did last season, I think that they would be able to get some things against this Miami secondary. And I don't think that Miami offensively would have a fun time against this Indiana defense. So Indiana plays Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Oregon plays Alabama in the Fiesta Bowl. All Big Ten national title. I think that to this point, not saying at the end of the year, to this point, Oregon is better than Alabama and Indiana is better than Georgia. Again, if I'm wrong about the talent scaling thing, then disregard anything I say about Indiana here. But I think at the end of the year, this is going to remain the case based on what I've seen. I don't think that Georgia quite is the upside of an Ohio State, Alabama, or Oregon, so they'd have a harder time challenging Indiana than, say, those other three. And I think Oregon has more room to grow, as I've mentioned before, than almost any team in college football, and they already have the argument to be number one by power ratings or even by strength of record. So they're going to beat Alabama in the Fiesta Bowl. And as for the national champion, I think Oregon's going to win it all at this point. They will go 16-0, according to current projections that I have. They'll beat Indiana, who will fall to 14-2. Is it likely that we're going to see a 16-0 national champion based on what we saw last year? Probably not. But also based on how this year has gone so far with Ohio State, Miami, Oregon, there's a chance that the national champion this year has fewer losses than last year. And I think that the odds of that are actually favorable. Ohio State and Oregon will be favored in all their remaining regular season games. One of them will be favored against each other if they win out in Indy, and even if they don't. So I have Ohio State, Indiana, and Michigan all tied for second in Big Ten standings. Ohio State actually won out in terms of tiebreakers based on how I read it. So I think the chance of an undefeated national champion or a one-loss champion as opposed to last year's two-loss champion in Ohio State, there's a chance that this year's champion has fewer losses. And with how Oregon's played, the easiness of their schedule compared to some of these other contenders, and the fact that they are young and have a lot of room to grow and yet look this ridiculously good, gives me confidence that they will be the best team in the nation when it's all said and done. Those are my Week 7 college football playoff predictions. As of today, as of Week 7, national title game will be a rematch of Oregon versus Indiana. And that's it. That's it. Thank you guys so much for stopping in. I got to make sure I get these videos out. Someone said I just smoked the Indiana crack. Yes. I did that last year, and I'm doing it again this year, and I think this year it's more justified to smoke the Indiana crack than it was last year. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've been live for 3 hours and 15 minutes, so I got to get out of here, make these edits. I will see you all very soon. Make sure, again, to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts in the live chat. Comment your thoughts after this live show is done to boost our presence in the algorithm. I will see you all very soon. Thank you so much for the support, and have a great night and a great week. We will be live again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and next week I won't really have any moving to do, at least for a weekend when I will help my family move into their new home. It'll be on Fridays, my off day.